The next item of business is the consideration stage of the Parental, Bereavement, Leave and Pay Bill. And I call the Minister for the Economy, Mr Gordon Lyons, to formally move the bill.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I move that the consideration stage of the Parental, Bereavement, Leave and Pay Bill is now taken.
Members may wish to note that Section 63 recommendation was affixed to the front cover of the bill in error and should be disregarded. Members will have a copy of the marshalled list of amendments detailing the order for consideration. The amendments have been grouped for the debate in the provisional grouping of amendments selected list. There are two groups of amendments, and we will debate the amendments in each group in turn. The first debate will be on Amendments 1 and Amendments 3 to 10, which deal with the provision for miscarriage leave and pay. The second debate will be on Amendment 2, which deals with week 1 rights. I remind members intending to speak during the debate on the two groups of amendments that they should address all of the amendments in each group on which they wish to comment. Once the debate in each group is completed, any further amendments in the group will be moved formally as we go through the bill, and the question on each will be put without further debate. The question on stand part will be taken at appropriate points in the bill. If that is clear, we will proceed. We now come to the first group of amendments for debate. With Amendment 1, it will be convenient to debate Amendments 3 to 10. Within this group, Amendment 3 is consequential to Amendment 1. Amendment 6 is consequential to Amendments 1 and 3. Amendment 7 is consequential to Amendment 4. Amendment 8 is consequential to Amendment 3. Amendment 9 is consequential to Amendment 1. And Amendment 10 is consequential to Amendment 4. Members may also wish to note that Amendment 5 is a paving amendment to Amendment 6. So I now call the Chairperson of the Committee for the Economy, Ms Dr Kiva Archibald, to move Amendment 1 and to address the other amendments in the group.
I beg to move. So I rise as Chair of the Economy Committee to move Amendment 1 and the other committee amendments in Group 1. The consideration stage today follows a very engaged and in-depth process of scrutiny of this bill by the committee. And I would like to touch briefly on the committee's analysis of the bill in providing background to the committee's amendments in this group. At the outset, I would like to thank the bill clerks for their help and support to the committee. Their assistance and that of our committee team has been invaluable to the committee. The committee heard evidence from a range of stakeholders and carried out a very detailed online survey to which it received 382 responses from organisations and representative bodies, as well as a significant number from individuals with personal experience of bereavement. And at this point, I would like to put on record the committee's appreciation of the evidence it received from individuals who have been impacted by the loss of a child. This evidence has been vital in informing the committee and enabling us to bring forward the important amendments which are before this House today. The committee's primary aim has been to ensure that this legislation is fit for purpose and that the opportunity is not missed through this bill to extend these protections to as many people as possible who find themselves in these most difficult of circumstances. The committee explored a wide range of issues raised in the written and oral evidence with the Department for the Economy officials through oral briefings and written responses. The committee deliberated on the provisions of the bill and the proposed amendments and concluded with its formal clause-by-clause consideration on the 8th of November 2021. There was overwhelming support for the provisions within this bill, and responses were positive in relation to the introduction of a legal entitlement to employee parental leave and pay, with the expectation that this would be a minimum provision in ensuring that parents and carers are supported in the event of parental bereavement. There was a general recognition that whilst many employers are compassionate in such circumstances, these protections could not be left to individual discretion and should be guaranteed statutory rights. The committee focused specifically on two main areas where it felt the support and protections offered by this bill could be widened and improved. These were in relation to including miscarriage and allowing for a day one right to pay rather than applying a 26-week qualifying period as intended in the bill. A number of individuals and stakeholders called for the bill to be extended to provide bereavement leave and pay rights in the event of miscarriage. The issue of the removal of the 26-week qualifying period for pay and the insertion of day one rights to parental bereavement pay was also raised consistently by representative bodies across key sectors, including trade unions, human rights, bereavement charities and business representatives. Based on the evidence it received, the committee wrote to the Department requesting that amendments be brought forward in both of these areas. The Department engaged on a number of occasions with the committee, and at the conclusion of this process it was determined by the committee that the Minister was not of a mind to take these issues forward in a way which was satisfactory to the committee, and the committee decided to pursue its own amendments. And I'd like to thank the officials from the Department's Bill team for their engagement and for making themselves available to the committee at short notice. I turn now to Group 1 amendments. The committee is bringing forward amendments 1, 3, 5, 6, 8 and 9, which collectively require the Department to bring forward a scheme to provide for leave and pay for miscarriage to be introduced within 12 months of the commencement of this bill. There was consensus within the committee for these amendments to be brought forward. As I have outlined, a significant number of individuals raised the issue of miscarriage in responding to the committee's survey on the bill, as did a number of stakeholders, including the Human Rights Commission, Unison and the women's representative groups. The committee therefore engaged in a series of detailed written and oral communications with the Department in relation to amending the bill to include miscarriage. It is fair to say that the Minister and the Department had a strong view that miscarriage was outside the scope of this bill, and that the Department's focus from the outset was to mirror the parental bereavement provisions enacted by the British Government. At its 3rd November meeting, the committee considered the proposed amendment from the Department, which is Amendment 4 on the marshalled list, which places a statutory obligation on the Department to consult on policy options for miscarriage as it relates to this bill and bring forward a report within 2 years of the associated regulations coming into effect. The committee did not consider this amendment to be sufficient, as there is no commitment to act on miscarriage beyond reporting on a consultation. The committee was also informed by the Department of what it described as a potentially significant increase in the cost of the bill in making this change, and that it did not believe the bill was the appropriate vehicle without having consulted on the practicalities. The committee believes that the costs will be manageable, and members believe that support for those suffering a miscarriage is important to be put into law. The committee was clear that it wished to place an explicit obligation on the Department to bring forward a scheme to provide for leave and pay for miscarriage, and for it to be introduced 12 months from royal assent for this bill. The committee has been careful to allow for that 12-month period, which would allow for consultation, whilst also avoiding any delay in the enactment of the main provisions of this bill. The Department has suggested that if the British Government is required to restore parity as a result of the amendments to this bill— Yes, go ahead.
I appreciate the Chair of the Committee giving way, because it's important that we look at this issue. There's a number of issues that the member will raise. I will address some of those in my contributions later on. But she's touched on the issue of 12 months, and she has said that that is sufficient time. And indeed in the committee she said that she thinks that the committee have been very flexible in using that period of time to get this through. But taking into consideration that we're coming towards the end of a mandate, that we have PERDA, that we have summer recess, and the process that it will take to get all of this through, the consultation, the liaison with the committee, the liaison with an executive. She has been informed, and the committee has been informed, that my officials don't think that's merely a tight time frame, but that it's going to be impossible for them to do that. Why then is she proceeding to do something that she knows is going to be impossible for my department to do?
So I thank the Minister for his intervention, and obviously he can lay out his arguments in a little short time. I don't believe it's impossible, so we'll take on board the views of the Department. And obviously there is further consideration stage to this bill, where if our amendments pass today and if the Minister can convince the committee that there is further time required, that's something I'm sure members in this House would be open to looking at. But can I continue with my comments, and you obviously can make your own contribution in the time ahead. So, as I say, we have been careful to allow for that 12-month period, which would allow for consultation whilst avoiding the delay in enacting the main provisions of this bill. The Department has suggested, obviously, if the British Government is required to restore parity as a result of the amendments to this bill, the Treasury could seek to recoup the cost of doing so from the Executive's DEL budget. The committee sought to probe this further, with the Department seeking further details on the Treasury rules and how these would apply. Yesterday, the Department offered this paragraph 2.610 of the Treasury's Statement of Funding Policy, funding the Scottish Government, Welsh Government and Northern Ireland Executive. That paragraph states, where decisions taken by any of the devolved administrations or bodies under their jurisdiction have financial implications for departments or agencies of the UK Government, or alternatively, decisions of the UK Government's departments or agencies lead to additional costs for any of the devolved administrations, where other arrangements do not exist automatically to adjust for such extra costs, for example, if the Barnett formula doesn't apply, the body whose decision leads to the additional cost will meet that cost. Lascan Corlia, the Department has not brought forward any precedents where a devolved administration was liable for the costs of the British Government restoring parity. It is also important to state that the committee has been careful in constructing its amendments to ensure that unforeseen difficulties would return to the floor of the Assembly for members to make a judgment. It is also for members to interpret this Treasury guidance for themselves in the absence of any clear evidence on how it could be applied. Additionally, the committee has been very clear that it does not want to delay the bill, hence the provision of a year for the Department to consult and bring forward regulations with respect to the committee's amendments. All regulations brought forward from this bill will be subject to the scrutiny of this House, as would any issues that arise to disrupt the bringing forward of those regulations. Members, we must also keep in mind that employment law is a devolved matter upon which the committee and this House has not only a right but a responsibility to take progressive action to the benefit of people here. The committee has ensured that any scheme to make provision for miscarriage will need to be approved by this House, so allowing members to consider any issues that might arise. Yes, I will.
Member giving way, does she not understand that actually by bringing in the committee amendments that she is proposing today, that it is actually going to delay the bill in its entirety? Because if the two amendments go through, it's going to be impossible for us to bring in parental leave and pay in April 2022. The only way that this House can ensure that that is in by April 2022 is by supporting my amendments today. Not only will we get that, but we will also then get that work that can be started in relation to miscarriage as well. This is going to be a big problem. We will not be able to get this in by April 2022 and possibly not even by April 2023 because of the work that's going to need to be done with HMRC. Will the member accept that that's what she's doing today?
I do not accept that. I don't accept the Minister's assertions. I believe that the work has been done in terms of the Parental Bereavement Leave and Pay Bill. You can bring that forward and at the same time have this further work conducted in relation to miscarriage and also in relation to the removing of the 26-week. No, I won't give way again. I will let you make your own comments and perhaps you'll let me give way. It's worth noting that Legal Ireland has recently announced its own bespoke policy around bereavement for employees both north and south. It has been reported to have introduced compassionate leave with pay for employees who have experienced or been directly impacted by early pregnancy loss or miscarriage. Additionally, the Government of New Zealand has legislated to support those who have suffered a miscarriage. The committee believes that it is acting in the best interests of the people of the North by taking this opportunity through this bill to afford these protections to as many parents as possible, whilst also ensuring that the original provisions of this bill are enacted within the current mandate. I would like to make some very brief comments at this stage as Sinn Féin Economy spokesperson. And firstly, I want to acknowledge the previous Economy Minister, Diane Dodds, for bringing forward the Parental Bereavement Leave and Pay Bill, which is an important piece of legislation in its own right, and as introduced would provide support for workers who find themselves in the awful circumstances of a child dying or a stillbirth. From this bill went out to consultation, I have raised the issues upon which the committee has brought forward amendments. that is, statutory leave and pay for workers suffering miscarriage and the provision of those rights from day one of employment, with the intent of ensuring that workers that are in those most terrible of circumstances have the right to compassionate support from the inter-employment. There has been a unity of purpose in much of the debate and discussion on this bill, which is positive, and in particular I'd like to record my thanks to my fellow committee members for the constructive and positive approach to deliberation on this bill. Employment is fully devolved to this Assembly. We have the ability to set our own policy, to be a leader when it comes to standing up for workers, and the amendments to this bill would make us a leader, certainly across these islands, in ensuring workers suffering miscarriage have access to paid leave, that they, along with workers who suffer the death of a child, would have the right to paid time off to seek support, to deal with practicalities, or simply to privately grieve and deal with their loss. So I would urge members across the Chamber to support the committee's amendments, which have been well considered and thought out, and I would reiterate my thanks to the Bills Office for their support in crafting these very pragmatic amendments, which do provide flexibility to the Minister and Department, which do allow for some modification if that was deemed necessary by consultation, and which would, as I have already stated, be brought back to this House for debate on the regulations to enact them. So, Last Concordia, I look forward to the rest of the members' contributions throughout the course of this debate.
Members, the Business Committee is arranged to meet at 1 p.m. today. I propose, therefore, by leave of the Assembly, to suspend this sitting until 2 p.m. The first item of business when we return will be questions to the Minister for Communities. The sitting is, by leave, suspended.
Okay, members, this sitting has now resumed, and we now return to consideration stage of the Parental, Bereavement, Leave and Pay Bill. We're on the Group 1 amendments debate, and I now call Peter Weir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise and I welcome the opportunity to contribute to this debate. Perhaps at the outset I should say, as a member of the committee, I welcome the sessions that we had, the evidence sessions, both particularly in terms of exploring some of the detail with departmental officials, but also the range of stakeholders, I think, has been valuable in the consideration in relation to this. There is, as we will come to, and has already been alluded to by both the Chair and the Minister, a divergence of opinion over the route that we take in relation to this today with the consideration stage. But perhaps on a broader note of consensus, it maybe is worthwhile highlighting perhaps a couple of points where at least there is a level of unity with us. Can I say I think everyone accepts the significance, the importance and the sensitivity of this legislation, and particularly as we move today to consider particularly the issue of bereavement around miscarriage, these sensitivities around this. I think it is important that we make provision on this field, and I praise both the Minister and his predecessor for bringing forward this legislation. And I think the committee is at one, and indeed the House is at one, with recognising the significance of the issue of bereavement for parents. I think of the committee, there's at least 3 of the committee who in recent months have lost a parent, and we know the grief of that, and we know the impact of that. But whatever the grief for us as sons and daughters, the grief that is there for parents when they lose a child, when it in some way seems to go against the natural order of things, is horrendous. And I think that the provision in terms of the legislation of looking at that leave in terms of bereavement is important. I think it is also the case, and while particularly the division in this group of amendments is on how we treat miscarriage, there is no doubt across the board, I think, that there is acceptance that we need to make a level of provision for parents who have suffered miscarriage. I think the divergence, as we will see today, is over precisely how we do that. But I think if we look, for instance, at the Minister's amendment, I think there is a clear acceptance of the need to make that level of provision that is there. Can I say, I suppose, there are maybe 3 areas where there are divergence or levels of caveat. It is undoubtedly the case whenever the legislation was brought forward initially, which mirrors legislation elsewhere, that in terms of the issue of miscarriage, It wasn't something that was there in the initial consultation. While we have had, as the Chair alluded to, a number of stakeholders have come forward with thoughts on this, it wasn't something that the main groups involved with miscarriage were particularly initially lobbying for. It's not something that was consulted on, and it is absolutely important. It is important, I think, probably in all legislation, but particularly around something as sensitive as this, that the legislation and the provision that is there is got right. And to some extent, and I think there will always be a pressure, particularly as we move towards the latter days of any Assembly term, that in terms of legislation, the desire, understandably, to get things through becomes overwhelming. But in doing so, there is also a need to take time to make sure that the provisions are got right. To that extent, I think that we do need, clearly, a level of consultation to make sure that the detail matches the provision to ensure that there is that proper level of provision. Secondly, I think there is a strong desire for this legislation to be in place as early as possible. We know that at present there isn't that provision. There will in some cases be, in individual employers, they will in many cases be understanding, but there's not that equality out there. And so therefore I think we do need to be wary over anything which delays legislation of this nature, because it will impact directly on real families. To that extent, I know the Minister has alluded to this, and I look forward to his remarks later on in the debate. The question is, given some of the other pressures that are there, the time frame, and there is a divergence between the committee's amendments and the ministerial amendments, as to whether within a period of 12 months, given PERDA, given the elections, the recesses, and indeed the pressure of putting forward other bits of legislation, whether this is something that genuinely could be put in place, because I think we need something that will be a whole package. There's no point in doing something which is piecemeal in its nature. We need something which will cover all families. Whether this is something that can be done within 12 months, I think is questionable. And as somebody who has served as a minister myself, I know the pressures that are there within departments, the ability, because we do, and rightly, have a level of consultation within these issues. So I think I would question and have a concern over the time frame that is there within the amendment. And thirdly, I suppose, where there is a level of potential divergence. We saw from the correspondence that the committee received yesterday, and I think it's something that we do need to explore in much greater level of detail, what the repercussive impacts of this, because while it's important we're not necessarily putting a price tag on various things, we do have a duty to ensure that whatever legislation we put through, we know precisely the consequences of that, and that could be financial as well. And I think it is concerning that the spectre of 100 million particularly has been raised. We know that there will be other aspects which will cost an additional amount of money. Given that understandably people in the past have been highly critical of commitments that were given, legislation, schemes that were put in place which ended up costing the public purse a much greater amount than was initially anticipated, I think it is right that we take a level of precaution over this. Consequently, I think that the approach taken by the Minister and the Department in taking a precautionary approach to ensure that this is got right and is something which is directly affordable, and a scheme that is brought forward that is affordable, is the correct approach. And so while I think the intentions of everyone and the intentions of the committee amendments come with good intentions, I think it is critical that we have good legislation which is got right. I don't want to see legislation that, because of practical difficulties, becomes either a lengthy period before it can be implemented or brought about, or indeed something which has such major economic repercussions that actually stop other good work doing. Because we can point to a large number of things where it is aiding people, which is a benefit to people, but we should also realise that whenever there is major financial commitments, that also comes out of other budgets. It prevents other good things happening in that regard. It may well be that whenever scrutiny is put into place, that perhaps some fears are not always ones that need always be realised. But I think given the scale of this, we do need to take a cautious approach to that, and that is why I would commend the departmental amendments, and while good-intentioned and well-intentioned, that the committee amendments are not of the same potential benefit as the ministerial amendments. So I would commend the departmental amendments.
Thank you. And I call Matthew O'Toole.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am pleased to have the opportunity to speak up at the microphone in front of me so people can hear what I'm saying. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pleased to have the opportunity to speak at consideration stage of the parental bereavement leave and pay bill. Mr. Speaker, first of all, we're saying I arrived late to the process. I joined the Economy Committee just a couple of weeks ago, and so I have not been involved in the detailed scrutiny of this bill up until now. But I would like to thank, first of all, my predecessor as our party representative and Vice Chair of the Committee, Sinead McLaughlin, but also the Chair of the Committee and also colleagues from other parties on the Committee who have done, and indeed the Committee Clerk and other Committee staff who have worked very hard on this bill, including to prepare the amendments that we are debating today. So though I've come late to this process, a significant amount of very detailed and indeed cross-party work has gone on in terms of developing these amendments. So I rise today to support the amendments that the committee is the committee is moving today, because, as I say, some of the detail has been covered already by the committee chair. I won't go through them in exhaustive detail. Obviously, it's amendments 1, 3, 5, 6 and 8. 8 and 9, sorry, which are the ones that the committee is moving. But in a sense, amendments 1 and 3 are the most substantive in that they collectively provide for the benefits in this outlined in this bill to be extended to those who have a miscarriage. It is first of all worth saying before I get on to the detail of the amendments, and I suppose given that I am relatively new to debating the bill itself, that this is a major step forward. I was not involved in the second stage debate, but as indeed the previous speaker, who takes a different view of the amendment, said to me, the question of parental bereavement is an extremely sensitive one, life-changing, shattering for anybody who experiences it. So this bill is an extremely welcome step forward. It is something profoundly positive that we can do and hopefully will do for people in this society. Even if we have a little time left, we weren't sitting for 3 years, and so I think, I guess, partially in response to some of what was just said about potentially rushing through legislation. Well, we weren't doing any legislation here for 3 years, and I'm not going to get into the whys and wherefores as to why we weren't sitting here, but the fact is that we weren't. So there's probably an added burden on us here to illustrate to the people who send us here, who we represent, and in a sense who pay our wages, that we're doing something for them. And this bill is something substantive, as are the committee amendments that are being discussed today, Mr. Speaker. The committee chair has gone into detail in terms of what the amendments do in terms of extending the provisions to for people who have suffered miscarriage. I won't go through them in detail, but a significant amount of work has gone into to developing them. But I would like to touch on some of the questions that have been raised, including by the Minister today, and the Minister has obviously raised these concerns, and you know, though I may not be agreeing with him, he's entitled to use his offices to raise these concerns. But in relation to his concerns and in relation to those that the Department have outlined to us, including in the correspondence that the committee received yesterday, the concern was that the concern has been raised that the Treasury could seek to restore parity because of the new rights that are being granted to people in Northern Ireland. First of all, I think it's worth saying it is disappointing that we've received this information relatively late in the detail. We have had a piece of correspondence or a written update from the Department, and obviously it's incumbent on all of us to take our responsibilities in terms of fiscal responsibility and financial management seriously, but we don't yet have a detailed financial estimate of financial costs. We have an estimate, or perhaps not even an estimate, a guesstimate of what this could cost. And the Minister has said, and I'm sure will say in his remarks, that he has a responsibility to be serious about these things. I suppose I would reiterate what the committee chair said in her remarks, which is that nothing about passing these amendments today commits the Assembly to a course of action which would necessarily lead to any financial repercussive effects, because we would, as was said, have the opportunity to debate and vote on further regulations. There is, of course, also a further consideration stage for this bill, and there's a final stage for it. So in relation to that, I think the idea that this passing these new rights today is somehow committing us to potential repercussive costs, I'm afraid that case, from mine and my party's perspective, is simply not made yet. And indeed there aren't. I will give way in 1 second. And indeed there haven't been serious, robust examples of where this has happened in the past. I will give way.
Just probably more on a procedural point that he raised. He mentioned about the effectively whatever we decide today will not necessarily be set in stone because of the further opportunities that are there. But I mean, the members should be aware that obviously we're dealing with consideration stage, which is principally the main point at which amendments are made. At further consideration stage, it's largely speaking a certain level of tweaking in relation to that, and the scope to make widespread amendments will be much more reduced at the further consideration stage. So I think we shouldn't blind ourselves that whatever decisions we take today can simply, if further information comes to light, be reversed at further consideration stage.
First of all, I know what further consideration stage is. I welcome the clarification from the member. I've been now through nearly here 2 years, and I've been through a few substantive bits of legislation. First of all, it's worth saying that I had a previous experience of some of this in a previous bit of legislation I debated, where I moved amendments that involved an obligation on the department at a further consideration stage. They did come back with clarifications, but nothing, frankly, that has been said thus far by the department with respect has convinced me either of the case that these repercussive costs are. I will give way in one moment to the Minister. Either these repercussive costs are likely, certainly not definite, or even that we would be committed to a precise course of action therein. And bear in mind, what the amendment does is it gives the department a full year after royal assent to come back on this. I'll give way to the Minister.
I appreciate the member giving way on a number of points. First of all, it was only after the committee had finalised its report that it asked for more information in terms of repercussive costs. We then went to the Department of Finance, who engaged with Treasury, that forms the basis of the response that the committee received yesterday, which sets out, I think, quite clearly the risks that are there. And I think it is important that those are taken on board, and the committee cannot say that they have not had sight of that. In terms of the previous examples of when this has happened, we only have to look back to the welfare debate in 2012, 2013, and although it was done in a different way, Treasury calculated what the saving would have been if the Northern Ireland Executive had implemented the welfare reforms. They didn't, and then that reduction was applied to the block grant. So it absolutely is the case that the Treasury has imposed financial penalties on the Northern Ireland Executive before when it deems fit to do so. So I think that the risk is there, albeit a small one, but I think it's something that we need to take into consideration. And finally, the point that I would make is that, yes, we have further consideration stages, and yes, there's a period of 12 months then to bring in these regulations, but the commitment is there to do it. We have to do it. We can't make change during that period because this Assembly will have already mandated what we have to do.
I appreciate all the points that the Minister just made, but what he closed by saying was that the amendment today was committing to doing it, and that's important, frankly, from my perspective. Having borne in mind all the evidence that's been put before us, I think this is an opportunity to create a legal commitment, and sometimes in this place we get a little caught up with regulation, with doing reviews, strategies and consultations on things that never deliver anything. We can all list countless examples of strategies, reviews and reports that we can consult on. Actually, this is an opportunity to put something in law that will be meaningful. And yes, there will be the opportunity to for the department to go away and design the detail of that. And as the committee chair said, it will come back to, in regulatory terms, come back to the floor of the Assembly. So, Mr. Speaker, I'll just make a little bit more progress as we talk about the other amendments in this group. Amendment 6 gives the Department a year, as has been said, after the bill's passage to provide the regulations that will extend these benefits to those who have had a miscarriage. I think it's worth saying that one of the arguments made previously, and as I say, I'm reiterating that I came to this process relatively late, so I wasn't involved in scrutiny discussion all the way through. It was said that this wasn't, I think it was implied, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, that this was not raised or this wasn't a subject of concern for people in the consultation. I'm not sure that's true. I think this is a live subject. I think this is something that is people who've experienced baby loss and miscarriage. I think this is clearly there is a significant amount of stakeholder and third sector attention on this issue. Amendment 5 amends the commencement section of the bill to reflect what's in Amendment 6, as I understand it. Now, one of the other issues I think that has been raised is the timing and the question of departmental capacity and whether 12 months is reasonable in terms of doing the consultation with PERDA and everything else. I mean, this argument has been made. What I would simply say is that people say the argument that that's not a reasonable time period. Well, I mean, I'm not entirely convinced that a 2-year period to do a consultation with no legislative certainty about what comes afterwards, it will seem to those who've lobbied on this entirely reasonable. As I said, a 2-year time period to carry out the consultation and produce recommendations would then, after that, there'd be a further period of legislative scrutiny before we actually passed this, before we passed anything around leave for miscarriage into law. And of course, during that time, there would be many people affected. But yes, I'll give way.
Appreciate the member's generosity in giving way. I have set out two members across this House the difficulties we're going to have with this timeline, and I'm more than happy to do that again more substantively during the debate. But just because you may think that 2 years is too long to do this work doesn't mean that we should accept an amendment which clearly doesn't give us enough time to do what it is that we're wanting to do. Now, on that point, I am flexible. I would say at the maximum point that would be 2 years. I'd be happy that that is done much, much quicker. But the point is that 12 months simply does not give us enough time to do what we need to do that is requested by the committee amendment.
Okay, thank you, Minister. I'm sure others people can judge as to whether they think it's a reasonable period or not. But I appreciate you've made your intervention, and I acknowledge that's the department's position. The Amendment 4 is I know the Minister. I'm sure will talk about it in more detail when he speaks and moves it. I mean, as I said. There are particular concerns around this consultation about the 2-year period and some of the questions that raises in terms of the Minister's consultation. It's my view that simply moving ahead with the committee amendments would be preferable. Amendments 8 and 9 are first of all, Amendment 8 ensures that the regulations will have to be approved by resolution of the Assembly, which obviously comes back to the point we discussed earlier around the fact that there is a degree of insurance there for the Assembly in terms of further movement on these questions. I won't go through Amendment 9 is I think relatively technical. Those, Mr. Speaker, are my thoughts on the first group of amendments. We are supportive of the committee amendments, and I am appreciative of the work that my predecessor and others on the committee have done to move them forward. This is an extremely important bill. I think these amendments are not just reasonable, I think they are an ethical response to what is a very difficult challenge and an opportunity for us to make law here that will hopefully improve the lives of people in extraordinarily difficult situations. I will give way briefly to the committee colleague.
Thank you for giving way. The member has made reference to the Minister's amendment and the amendment brought forward by the committee. Would you like to compare and contrast what those two amendments actually seek to achieve? It is my belief that the committee amendment provides substantially more assurance for this House and substantially more assurance for those who are listening to us today that there will be delivery in respect of the outcome of this bill.
Well, I think the member, my committee colleague, has probably made his point more effectively than I would. He's been on the committee longer and did more of the deliberation. But I think, I mean, he is right that the intention of Amendment 4 is to go away and do a consultation and then lay it within 2 years in front of the Assembly. It doesn't even mandate further legislation after that. It doesn't mandate a review followed by a legislative response. It's simply a review which is laid in front of the Assembly. What the amendments today do is to create a legislative obligation, but with a year for the Department to go away and deliver on it. I think, and my party thinks, Mr. Speaker, sorry, that is a more that's a better way to proceed today. So we endorse the committee amendments. Thank you.
Call Rosemary Barton.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity this afternoon to speak in support of the principle of the Parental Bereavement Leave Bill and support the committee amendments. There is nothing worse than the loss and grief surrounding the loss of a child, a young life that is brought into this world, so looked forward to growing into adulthood and is expected to outlive their parents. At any one time in the UK, around 1 in 10 workers are believed to be affected by bereavement. While there are organisations and employers at the time of bereavement that offer compassion and support, in a survey of employees completed in Northern Ireland, 1 in 7 bereaved parents say they had not been offered a single day of paid bereavement leave. The impact of bereavement, particularly that due to the loss of a child, can have an adverse impact on the health and well-being of a parent. 3 days paid bereavement allowance, which is quite frequent with so many employers in Northern Ireland, gives so little time for grief, along with a funeral to organise, supporting a family and dealing with the necessary requirements and practical tasks following a funeral. With such a limited bereavement time, loved ones return both physically and emotionally exhausted to work, without the time, space or financial support to grieve properly or come to terms with their loss. As existing legislation in Northern Ireland does not define the duration of a bereavement leave, for a parent who needs time off work following a death, this bill we are debating this afternoon will provide the necessary legislation for the Parental Bereavement Bill, including leave and pay considerations. This consideration should include payment from day one for the bereavement leave for a child under 18 years of age, including those of a miscarriage that has happened and also a stillbirth. This leave will be this leave hopefully will help and support parents as they come to terms with their grief. In conclusion, this bill for parental bereavement, leave and pay will be an important step in counterbalancing the legislation already in place elsewhere. Mr. Speaker, the Ulster Unionist Party support this bill.
Thank you. And I call Stuart Dixon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to everybody who has worked so incredibly hard in where we are in this debate today, particularly to my colleagues on the Economy Committee who have worked around this issue with incredible diligence, to the staff in the committee who have assisted us, and indeed to all of those people who came and spoke and shared with us their desires to see this piece of legislation being delivered in Northern Ireland. This is not an easy debate, and it will not be an easy debate for people listening in today, and we need to acknowledge that. That's why I would wish to open by, on the one hand, I understand from my previous career the arguments that the Minister is bringing forward and the reasons and pressures that there are on civil servants and others to bring forward legislation that actually works and delivers. However, out there is a population of people who have been through this or may ultimately face the circumstances that this bill is trying to provide for. And it's to them that I'm thinking to today in respect of why the Alliance Party will be supporting the amendments that have been brought forward by the committee. Indeed, and you will hear from one of my colleagues, Mr Speaker, later in this debate, Kelly Armstrong, who herself, at the very outset of this piece of legislation, when it was being mooted, indicated very strongly that she would wish to bring the very amendments that are actually brought to the House today. So this is an issue that affects individuals, and I've no doubt you will hear what she has to say and her personal story later in this debate. It goes without saying that the loss of a child is, of course, profoundly sad and life-changing for the parent and parents. Therefore, it is important that we do welcome the introduction of this legislation to support parents and caregivers at a deeply challenging point in their lives. It's imperative, therefore, on us as legislators to do anything within our power to help alleviate the financial struggles of a family at that point in time, and to assist and provide the space to start much of sometimes very lengthy grieving process. As the law currently stands with regards to parental bereavement leave, there is no automatic right to paid leave in Northern Ireland after the death of a child. That, Mr Speaker, starkly contrasts with the rest of the United Kingdom, where there is access to maternity and paternity leave after the birth of a stillborn since April 2018. So we in Northern Ireland are running remarkably behind. Yes, I will.
I appreciate the member giving way, and I think it's an important point that he has made, that we are already far behind the rest of the UK on this issue. My concern is that if we are to take this bill through with these amendments, it will push the implementation date of this provision from April 2022 to potentially April 2024. There's a small chance we could get it in 2023, but that's unlikely. Surely the more responsible thing to do would be to make sure that these provisions are implemented in April 2022 for parental bereavement leave and pay, and then address the issues subsequently. Surely people have waited too long already.
Mr Speaker, I don't pretend to understand all of the technical nuances of what the Minister is indicating to us, but it seems to me that it should not be beyond the ability of this House, or indeed of those drafting this legislation and bringing it forward today, or indeed in the space that remains between today and further consideration stage, that we shouldn't be able to address that very issue to allow us to have the speediest of implementation of this legislation, but at the same time to allow, as I will develop in this discussion, the opportunity for the Department to come forward with further regulation, which, as my colleague Mr O'Toole has indicated, this House will have absolute power over in terms of the delivery of that. Yes, I will.
Appreciate the member going away, but this is a key point, because this is a very lengthy discussion I have had with my officials over the course of last evening and this morning, that it's not simply just something we should be able to get done. Because we're now putting these two things together, it means that there's the preparatory work that needs to be done, the consultation that needs to be done, the process of going back to the committee, the regulations being put in place, and then it needs to go to HMRC, and then we're dependent on their timetable. And of course, this can't come in the middle of the year. It either has to come in April 2023 or April 2024. There's nothing that we will be able to do that will mean that this can be pushed on. So I appeal to the whole House. If we want to see parental bereavement leave and pay in April 2022, we need to separate these issues and allow this to go forward. Can I please urge the House to do this, because I believe people have been waiting too long.
I thank Mr. Speaker, the Minister for what he's been saying, but for me this goes beyond parental bereavement leave, and it covers that area, as I will develop, of miscarriage as well, and it's vitally important that we embrace that holistically in this legislation. This is perhaps a once-off opportunity to bring this legislation forward, and my fear is that just to support the Minister's amendment would allow a minister in the future to be blown off course in the delivery of what we're trying to achieve today. And I think it's important that we work as hard as we can today in this debate and in the subsequent time remaining to us to deliver this to ensure that we deliver the intention that the committee has come about. Yes, of course I will.
No, I do appreciate it, because this is an important point. I understand the point that he is making, that within my amendment it is not committing us hard and fast to bringing in regulation. But I think if you listen to the contributions of people right across this House, it's what we all want to see. However, it's not going to be possible to bring that in within the same period of time as the parental leave. So why can't we as a House take the decision today to go ahead, as all the preparatory work has been done with parental bereavement leave and pay, and then address that other issue? I'm prepared to make an amendment at further consideration stage to make sure that that consultation and report is done in 1 year. It'll be tight, but we can do it. But I think that allows us to make sure that in April 2022 we have parental leave in place and parental pay in place. Can we please take that route so that we can ensure this gets in? Because I don't think you're going to see anybody lacking anywhere else around this House in terms of doing the necessary work when it comes to miscarriage.
I understand what the Minister is saying, but I think at this point and at this stage in the debate and potential subsequent vote today, I am not prepared to leave this legislation to chance. To the chance that we will have a consultation, and that consultation will guide a future Assembly, a future committee and a future Minister in what to do. I want to grasp the opportunity today. I understand what the Minister is saying about how that has the potential to push the time frame and perhaps make things more difficult. But I think we do have time to continue these discussions, and for today I think it's important that this Assembly sets out a very clear message and sets down a very clear marker in respect of delivering. Mr. Speaker, no parent or caregiver should be tasked with dealing with the additional pressures or loss of income that is in an already stressful time. In Northern Ireland, some 450 employed parents struggle with the death of a child. There are, of course, many employers who are compassionate in such circumstances, and I hope that today's debate will encourage more employers to think about how they could effectively implement what we're trying to achieve by way of legislation. There's nothing to stop them doing it today. Absolutely nothing to stop them doing it today. So we need to ensure that as a society that we have a consistent and standardised and statutory rights for workers. The Minister has brought forward a bill that establishes an essential framework for the Department to build on. But as you know, and fellow members of the committee, I'm concerned that this bill does not go far enough. That is the goal that I wish to seek and achieve today. That's where I think we need to be moving to. That's why, in the consideration that the committee has given to bringing forward these amendments, we have not done this lightly. We have, of course, as our first priority and the first imperative on us is to provide the comfort and the financial support that is necessary, not just for parental bereavement leave, but also for miscarriage leave as well. Even more legislation. This is important because miscarriage is a deeply traumatic and personal loss that requires the identical protection that the loss of a child through stillbirth has as well. It affects many women and their families, and yet often continues to be discussed with hushed voices, if even at all. So I hope that by extending this bill to cover miscarriage, it can go some way to ending the silence and ending the stigma. We've carefully considered the bill in the Economy Committee, and we have listened to the words from individuals and to stakeholders. We've listened to trade unions, we've listened to human rights organisations, bereavement charities and business representatives, all of whom have given us the encouragement to bring forward these amendments today. They have constantly raised the one area of concern, which goes beyond and into the second group of amendments with regards to when the payment should be provided, and I'm happy to continue to speak to that at this stage as well. There's no justification why the protection should only come at 26 weeks after employment. No one should be any less entitled to compassion after the loss of a child. It's vitally important that we get legislation on such sensitive issues right, and I really do understand what the Minister is saying, and I do get the difficulty around this, but we're here to solve difficult problems, and pushing them down the road, Minister, is not going to solve this problem. This bill needs to cover miscarriage and to ensure that it is a week one right. It's regrettable that the Department have not been able to work fully with us on these amendments. And I accept that there's been a lot of work done and a lot of discussion has taken place. But I think there is a gap that we need to narrow with regards to this bill, and that we need to support these amendments. It's unfortunate that the scope of this legislation, as others have said, has been affected by what has happened in the life of this particular Assembly. But we are where we are today, and we have an opportunity to legislate. The Alliance Party believes that this is an important step towards fixing our outdated bereavement protections. I am concerned the playing field would continue to be uneven for everyone who falls outside of it. Therefore, we are pledged to bringing forward legislation in the next mandate which will deliver more comprehensive and more compassionate leave, as well, as we have heard from many of the people that came to the committee. So, in closing, Mr. Speaker, these provisions are long overdue. I want to thank the Minister for bringing it forward, and his predecessor. They are in the right place. They have considered this as part of their programme, and that is to be welcomed. But in general, I think it is important that not just supporting the basic bill, but we need to provide the enhancement that the committee amendments are proposing today. The loss of the child is one of the worst things that anyone could imagine. It's simply the right thing for us to do to ensure that workers are treated with compassion and protection in the circumstances. Mr. Speaker, this is the day for this Assembly to make a bold decision and to push the envelope as far as we can to encourage and to have a department that hopefully after today's debate will come alongside what the committee is attempting to achieve by bringing forward its amendments, and that we will continue to work in the same direction to deliver for everybody who's affected by the content of this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, and I call Orlia Flynn.
I can't call you, excuse me. So I also just want to repeat some of the comments that my colleague and the chair of the committee made earlier, and just to say that Sinn Féin is fully supportive of the implementation of the Parental Bereavement Leave Bill, but I also want to speak today in support of the amendment to extend the parental leave to parents who have lost a child before the 24 weeks of pregnancy due to miscarriage. It is my view that they deserve to be supported, and they also need the compassionate leave from work in order to process and to come to terms with what can be an extremely difficult and sad experience for many parents and individuals. And I know just earlier in some of the comments, Mr. Weir had mentioned that we want to get the legislation in place as early as possible. I know the Minister referenced that as well, and yes, we absolutely do, but it has been mentioned that it's about getting it right, and I also know the Minister was mentioning about obviously trying to aim to get it through in 2022, so come 2022 then you have that parental leave, you have that parental pay for all those parents who have been bereaved. But what my concern... Yes, yep.
appreciate the member giving way, but the point that I have been making through the course of interventions, and I appreciate members for being so generous, is that if these amendments go through, we can't have parental leave in April 2022. They become tied together, and that pushes it down the line to 2024. So my approach is, let's have parental bereavement leave and pay now. Then let's work on the miscarriage issue, and it can be in place then for 2024. Or else we can have both of them in 2024. Surely my approach is better.
And I thank the Minister for that intervention, and I appreciate his viewpoint and the work that his department have done in considering the issue. But the point that I was actually going to go on to make was, you know, even if we did have that legislation in place as is in 2022 for parental leave, to me then it's still being exclusive to parents who have lost a child, you know, outside of pregnancy. So for those parents that have lost a baby through miscarriage, then they're not going to be included within the legislation. So just to come back then to my remarks, we know that there is currently a huge gap in support for parents that suffer from miscarriages. And again, it's just to make the point to the Minister as well. Do you know, when we're talking about the gaps in support, it's not exclusively gaps in provision from the Department of Economy. And I'm a member of the Health Committee, and we know that there's gaps in provision in terms of healthcare as well. But in relation to this debate and this piece of legislation, I do think that there is an opportunity for the Department of Economy to actually fill some of those gaps in terms of miscarriages. We know that maternity leave entitlements don't apply to mothers who have a miscarriage during their pregnancy. However, they do apply to mothers that have stillbirths. And I genuinely believe that this legislation provides an opportunity, alongside the amendment, to support those who in the past have really had little to no support in their workplace at all. And the Miscarriage Association presented to MLAs at the Assembly All-Party Group on Women's Health back in April, and we heard some feedback then that there is that lack of specialist support and recognition for parents who are experiencing or who have experienced miscarriages, and parents who have went through, which really is a really tragic and emotional experience for anyone that's went through it. The parents that were given feedback to some of those surveys have been clear about what they want, and this does cut across all the departments, and that is empathy, sensitivity and support. So in terms of financial supports, I think it would be a great gesture for this Assembly and for the Minister's department to show that gesture to these parents through the parental pay. This amendment, if passed, I think would lift a huge burden and pressure from parents who have experienced feeling under pressure and having that feeling that they shouldn't be returning to work before they're ready. And I know that it was the Alliance member that was speaking there before me had touched on that issue around the issue of stigma and shame that actually still surrounds miscarriages for a lot of parents. And I think that if this legislation is passed and that payment can be made, that will deal with some of that stigma and shame in the workplace, even being able to have that conversation with your employer that you're genuinely not ready to return to work because of the experience of your miscarriage. So I don't think it's acceptable that the current system doesn't allow for paid time off work following the loss of an unborn baby. And again, I do think that actually does contribute to some of the shame that some people out there are feeling. And for some people, pregnancy loss can also form a part of what causes a mental health problem, or for some people that actually already have a mental health problem or a mental health illness, going through that experience of a miscarriage can actually make that illness work. We know that some people might be given a diagnosis like post-traumatic stress disorder. That's how serious a miscarriage can actually be in someone's life. And people can go on to experience symptoms that make their life difficult, for a very long time. Sometimes the trauma of the loss of an unborn baby through miscarriage can cause intrusive thoughts, flashbacks, nightmares. Sometimes it's what happens afterwards that contributes then to someone going on to have mental health problems. And then lots of people experience a combination of these things. And then down the line, I think if we don't invest in this now, and some people do go on to form mental health problems and illnesses because they haven't dealt with their miscarriage, or they haven't took the time off that they genuinely needed, then that actually has a knock-on effect in terms of their jobs and their carrying out and performing, the role that they need to perform in their working environment. And it is estimated, just to give you a sense of how large this problem is, that as many as 1 in 4 pregnancies do actually end in miscarriage. So it is a really horrible common experience that many people in the workplace are experiencing, and that will require time off, and hopefully that can avail of the legal entitlement and frameworks that could be put in place then to allow for them to receive payment. Just to bring my remarks to a close, I just want to thank the committee chair and all the members who have spoken so far in this really, really important debate, and I hope that the department can work alongside the committee and the Assembly can pass the amendments for this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Mr Keith Buchanan.
Thank you, Mr Principal Deputy Speaker, and thank you for the opportunity here today. I rise today in support of the bill. I fully support miscarriage being included in the Parental Bereavement Leave and Pay Bill. The inclusion of miscarriage by means of amendments without full consultation would have implications for other employment law. The bill before us today, that was first introduced by the Minister for the Economy on the 1st of June 2021, and many of the amendments, while they seem reasonable and compassionate, require full consultation, and we must ensure that they will not breach any parity principle with our counterparts within the rest of the United Kingdom. The aim of the bill is to ensure that Northern Ireland Parental Bereavement Leave and Pay Bill will replicate the provisions in Great Britain, and to ensure that employees in Northern Ireland are afforded the same employment rights as their counterparts in GB. The Department of Economy would hope that this bill could be introduced by April 2022. With this uppermost in our mind, the emphasis of this bill, therefore, was to ensure working parents who experience stillbirth and child deaths would be afforded the same employment rights as their counterparts in GB. In June 2020, the Department for Economy opened a consultation to notify the Northern Ireland public of its intention to introduce similar Parental Bereavement Leave and Pay Bill provisions to those provided under the GB Act for working parents in Northern Ireland, and this consultation ran from the 15th of June to the 10th of August 2020 and received 36 responses from a variety of stakeholders. If further consultation is required, this would therefore delay the bill further, and it may not be completed during this mandate. There will need to be an appropriate level of Assembly scrutiny of those regulations to ensure they are fit for purpose. Sadly, miscarriage is a loss that many couples experience. It is not a loss only felt by the mother, it also impacts and affects the father of the child. Many couples suffer this loss on a number of occasions, and each miscarriage causes pain and grief for both parents. Based on the 2019 NISRA figures, and the previous speaker referred to this, for births, and NHS estimate that 1 in 8 pregnancies end through miscarriage. This would mean that there were approximately 3,200 miscarriages in Northern Ireland in 2019. Miscarriage support groups would estimate that 1 in 4 pregnancies end through miscarriage, and this would increase the number of miscarriages to 7,500. So that figure is anywhere between 3,200 and 7,500. And if you look at it, which you looked at actually this morning, the number of children or babies born each year is approximately 24 to 25,000. So that gives you a sort of a context of the number of miscarriages based on what actual children that are then born. For many parents, they carry the burden of miscarriage alone, because it is an early miscarriage that they may not have told their family about the pregnancy, and therefore they have no support network. This is a sad reality of many miscarriages. This loss can have a devastating effect on parents, and employers should always consider what's best for their employee, depending on their specific circumstances. Mental health conditions like anxiety and depression are common for anyone who experiences a death in the family, no matter what age of the loved one who has passed on. There is no doubt or question that employers should support their employee in the same way they would support them after any other death, but we must also note the GB Parental Bereavement Leave and Pay Act did not include provision for paid leave after miscarriage, and therefore there was no specific consideration referenced during the consultation exercise. It should also be noted that in the Republic of Ireland, despite previous attempts to legislate in this regard, there is still no statutory entitlement to parental bereavement leave and pay, and this remains largely at the discretion of the employer. Some employers have their own policy regarding parental leave, and this year, as previously mentioned by the Chair, Northern Ireland introduced a new policy to give employees 3 days of paid compassionate leave following an early pregnancy, loss or miscarriage, along with a support system that includes 24 access to its dedicated employee assistance programme for mental health. If we are to change our employment law framework, either through this bill or way of a separate miscarriage bill without GB doing likewise, the funding of the running costs would fall to the Northern Executive. In addition, there would be significant system set-up costs payable to HMRC. While we remember we are talking about the loss of a child and a precious life, and also the very real grief of parents, we must also ask if the amendments and changes to the bill that are being proposed have been fully considered and consulted on. Have all aspects of the bill and proposed amendments been considered, and the wider implications that this would have on employment law? It has been estimated that there will be £1.5 million cost to this change, and this does not include a further consideration should we deviate from the Parental Bereavement Leave and Pay Act 2018. There are potential repercussion costs for the Northern Ireland Block Grant, and in turn the Executive Budget, should NI make a legislative change that GB is then required to make when it is not GB policy to do so. I'm not going to read out, obviously, again the quote from the Her Majesty's Treasurer statement on funding. The Chair, to be fair, has done that previously, but we cannot ignore this. These costs have been estimated to be approximately £100 million per year in the event that the United Kingdom Government insisted on receiving these costs. I would therefore urge that full consideration be given to, and the necessary and required consultation take place prior to any decision being taken to include miscarriage to this bill. Again, I stress, while miscarriage is an emotive issue that affects both the mother and father, we must ensure that the inclusion of miscarriage to any parental bereavement bill has been fully consulted on, and that will not have further implications to other employment rights and laws. It is important to make good law properly, not swiftly, and without due consideration and consultation. I would just like to thank the Chair, the Committee, and obviously the officials in the Department, and obviously any other organisation that has given evidence to the Committee. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Ms Nicola Brogan.
I welcome the opportunity to participate in today's debate because I think this is a really important piece of legislation, and I think these rights are long overdue. The bill recognises parental bereavement as a significant issue that unfortunately affects the lives of so many people in society. Parents who experience the unimaginable pain of losing a child deserve to be supported and offered compassionate leave from work to give them some time to deal with the grief. In an ideal world for someone who has suffered such a devastating loss, such as the loss of a child, I suppose work and finances should be the last thing they have to worry about, but the reality is that bills still need to be paid. They still need to pay rent and their mortgage, food needs to be put on the table, heating needs to be paid for. So I think that the parental bereavement leave and pay, as discussed in the bill, will offer some support to those that need it in the most difficult of times. I'm not actually a member of the Economy Committee, but I spoke at the second stage of the debate on this bill, and I supported to go through to committee stage. And at stage 2, I highlighted a number of concerns that I had around the bill and areas that I hoped could be developed by the committee. I'm glad that the Minister and the Department for Economy had agreed to include parental bereavement leave to those who suffered stillbirths. But myself and a number of other members of the House at second stage suggested it should be extended to parents who suffered miscarriage as well. And I'm pleased that the committee has brought forward amendments to the bill to include parents who have lost a child before 24 weeks of pregnancy due to miscarriage. We know the suffering that miscarriage can have and the devastating impact on parents and families that miscarriage can have, and I think it's so important that we do extend this support to them. As my colleague Orlea Flynn has already said, there's a real gap in support for parents who do suffer miscarriage, and representative organisations such as Miscarriage Association have found that there is a lack of specialist support and recognition for parents who do experience miscarriages. And again, as Orlea has said, maternity leave entitlements don't apply to mothers who have a miscarriage during the pregnancy. And parents who were surveyed by the association have said they felt under pressure to return to work before they were ready to. So I think this bill is an opportunity for us in the North to set a trend and to be at the fore, to show compassion for parents who miscarry a baby by including them in this bill and by providing support to those who in the past have had little to no support. It's my understanding that we would be the first jurisdiction in the Northern Hemisphere to extend these rights to parents who suffer miscarriage. And I think that would be a really positive step. So I will support the committee's amendments, and I hope that the Assembly will support the committee amendments as well. Mr
Stephen Dunn.
Thank you, Mr Principal Deputy Speaker, and I too welcome the opportunity to speak on this important issue in the House today at the consideration stage of the Parental Bereavement Leave and Pay Bill. Whilst I was not a member of this House when this bill went through its second stage, there has indeed been a considerable amount of work done by the committee and the department, and in that time I've certainly recognised the importance of this bill. This bill follows the introduction of the Parental Bereavement Leave and Pay legislation brought forward by our UK Parliament in April 21 and through the Parental Bereavement Leave and Pay Act 2018. And it would indeed create a statutory entitlement to leave and pay for working parents who suffer the death or stillbirth of a child. I would like at the outset to join others in thanking all of the organisations and bodies who engaged with the Economy Committee on this important matter through the original bill and indeed through the Department's public consultation, which ran between June and August 2020, including those who shared some very personal and moving and traumatic stories of their loss. Throughout the consultation and engagement process, there was strong support for the delivery of this bill from right across Northern Ireland, and I think this highlights the importance of getting it right and ensuring we don't see any further delays in delivering on this most important legislation and support where it's needed. I would also like to commend the many charities who support bereaved parents on a day and daily basis right across our country, as well as the support workers through our health trusts, and acknowledge the work of the Minister and his officials for their input and work to date in ensuring bereaved payments get the support they deserve, and indeed the engagement the Department has had with the Committee, and also to acknowledge and thank the work of our Committee staff. The loss of a child is truly devastating for any family. It does not just impact the parents, but also family members, carers and relatives can also be significantly impacted by such a tragedy. And it's completely understandable that working parents who experience such a bereavement will need the compassion and support of a caring employer. And we are fortunate that there are many employers out there who do act responsibly and will make provision for paid compassionate leave. However, it currently has no statutory protection and may only cover a few days, and some employees won't all be in that fortunate position. The purpose of this bill originally was always to ensure employees who suffer the loss of a child under the age of 18 or stillbirth would have a statutory entitlement to 2 weeks' leave, and in most cases working parents would be also entitled to statutory payment, bringing much needed clarity, certainty and support for both employers and employees, and a statutory safety net for working parents who suffer such a profound loss, and bringing Northern Ireland into line with the rest of Great Britain in providing parental leave, pay and employment protections and affording the same employment rights for workers. In 2020, according to NISRA statistics, there were 69 stillbirths and 93 infant deaths alone registered here. Each of those represents a wide network of family, friends and carers who are equally impacted. During the committee stage, we learned that child deaths affect approximately 450 working parents here every year. And I think these sad and tragic statistics confirm the need for this bill and for us being here today to introduce this in the first place. And I'm glad and grateful that our previous Minister Dodds introduced this and brought this forward. And these facts and figures also reaffirm the need for any legislation to be carefully considered and fully and extensively consulted upon. I know some of my colleagues have also touched on that point. We cannot ignore the very real and stark financial risks that exist, and there would indeed be a cost of breaking parity on such an important issue as this. And this was indeed brought home to us, those of us who are on the Economy Committee, when we received a written briefing in response to engagement between Department of Finance officials with HM Treasury just yesterday on the 29th of November, and the Department stated, and I quote, "If the UK Government sought to restore parity as a result of the amendments made to the NI Bill, the estimated liability would be £100 million per annum." And I think it would be responsible for us all to take serious stock of this and fully consider all consequences. We don't want to see any further delays for working parents getting the support they deserved. Bereaved parents have already suffered through so much trauma and having to wait even longer would be very regrettable and totally unacceptable. If the committee amendments were passed, and if this bill was not able to be delivered in the time frame, as the Minister has warned numerous times today already, and in correspondence with the committee, it would be a very regrettable step. And the reality that the benefits of this bill may not be delivered until April 23 or indeed April 24, no, you'll have plenty of time, thank you, is of great concern, and every effort must be made to ensure it can be delivered on time, as the Minister has already warned. Miscarriage is indeed an extremely sensitive and complex matter, and there can be many different stages to it. A miscarriage can bring such devastation to so many families, and unfortunately some families can suffer from multiple miscarriages, which further multiplies the long-lasting grief. And I know from speaking to close friends, the pain and devastation that this can bring is very real and traumatic and can last many, many years. As has been already mentioned in this debate, it is estimated that it can affect between up to 1 in 4 and 1 in 8 pregnancies, again highlighting the seriousness of this. Whilst the committee amendments do raise very important issues and the need for improved support around miscarriage, I do not believe it is best to support them at this stage, and I don't believe they can be achieved as quickly as they are needed. I am glad the Department recognises the need for a full and comprehensive review around the full assessment of employment law and our framework right across Northern Ireland. However, the reality is that this work around employment law will not be able to complete it in the relatively short window of time we have left of this mandate. All will be better looked at collectively by the Department with full consultation, engagement and focused outcomes, delivering the best for those who have to contend with such devastating circumstances. Thank you, Mr. Principal Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. Mrs Kelly-Armstrong.
Thank you, Principal Deputy Speaker. I'm taking a bit of an intake of breath here because, as we all know in this House, this is something that's very close to my heart. So I'll start off with declaring an interest. Of my 14 pregnancies, 13 ended in miscarriage. I have been a bereavement counsellor for Remember Our Child, which is a Northern Ireland miscarriage organisation. Unfortunately, no longer there, but we do have the Miscarriage Association. But what I would like to say, as I did say in the second stage, I apologise if this debate triggers any parents who have lost a child. I would like to thank the Minister for bringing forward the Parental Bereavement Bill. You have no idea how much that will help parents across Northern Ireland. I also would like to thank the committee for bringing forward the amendments to include miscarriage. We are the forgotten grief, we are the taboo grief, and we are always left behind. So, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. As my colleague said, I was working on amendments. I only decided not to bring those amendments forward when it became clear that the committee was taking forward amendments that appeared on the marshalled list. I was going in the same direction as yourselves. We have the opportunity to move Northern Ireland forward to be a leader on recognising that parents who lose a child during pregnancy before 24 weeks matter. As someone who has miscarried, and unfortunately have miscarried many times, the only reason why I'm not in tears here is because I promised lots of parents that I would stand on their behalf. I was an employee. I was an employee in a number of different companies, and while lots of you have said here there are great employers, not in my experience. The long-term cost of not recognising miscarriage within employment is what happened, what I did. I had 3 months off in the sick where a doctor put me on diazepam to cope with the grief. And then eventually after 3 months, when he decided I wasn't going to throw myself off a cliff, he took me off the diazepam and sent me back with a note to go back to work. I left that work. I was a skilled employee in each one of those employments. And I left the work and I said, stuff them, because I was sitting beside other pregnant women. I was sitting in a room with other families who had all those joyful occasions, and there I was, the pain sitting in the corner, who nobody wanted to talk about my grief or why I got sad at different dates. The long-term impact of miscarriage is damaging our workforce. I want to talk now just about the money side of things. Can I just say to each and every one of you who are worried about the money, you see, when you've had a miscarriage, you couldn't give two hoots about the money because you're grieving the death of that possibility, of that child who's not going to be there. So let's set the money aside. And can I just say to each and every one of you,
And Minister, I'll get to your Amendment 4 and why there's a problem with it, but can I say to each and every one of you, don't assume that anybody who's had a miscarriage will be looking for miscarriage leave. And there was someone on the DUP benches made a very good point. When you have a miscarriage, if it's early miscarriage, you haven't told anyone else. And believe me, while you may say that there are good employers, many employers do still not want to have women of childbearing age in their workforce because you will take maternity leave. So they hide it. Women hide it. I hid it because I didn't want to have to face it time and time again with HR, why I was off for a third time that year because I'd had another miscarriage, because I could have been sacked. That is the realities of being a woman employed in Northern Ireland today. With regards to consultation, some of you have complained and said that people who have miscarriage did not respond to the consultation. Of course we didn't. Why would we? It wasn't on the face of the bill. I am used to not being treated as a grieving mother. I am used to being treated as that embarrassment sitting in the corner. The bill in its original, the way it was drafted, didn't include me. It didn't want me. It didn't see me as important. But Minister, I cannot support your Clause 4. And I come at this in a very, very different way. And I will say to you in your Clause 4, you have no hope of completing that consultation. And the reason why I say that is because Amendment 4, new Clause 3A, number 2, the consultation may include in particular consultation to whether the entitlements should be conferred in all cases where a person has had a miscarriage and only some cases. As somebody who's had a miscarriage, I can't answer that because you are making us who have had miscarriages different. You're making even those who have had miscarriages, you're segmenting us. Then, 2B, whether the entitlements to be conferred in such cases should be the same as or different from the entitlements that are conferred where a child has died. I had 13 children died in my womb. They are dead children. This clause, or this Amendment 4, seems to insinuate that mine wasn't children. I just can't cope with that. And then it goes under 2C, whether anyone other than the person who has miscarried should also be entitled to leave or pay. That's any father or other mother. I can't stand by that. After the years I have been in miscarriage bereavement counselling with people, these are the very words that cause the harm and the year-long anguish to people. And then again in 2D, whether different entitlements could be conferred in different cases of miscarriage. You lose a baby before 24 weeks, you lose a baby. And I also have to say, Minister, I'm really sorry, but the evidence that you're looking for is not there. Where are you going to find this evidence? I know for years of working in the miscarriage field, when you ask how many people in Northern Ireland have had miscarriages and you go to the health records, you only get the records of those people who appear at a hospital and have a miscarriage. That is as little as 1 in 10 of those of us who have had miscarriages. Of my 13, it was only the last one I was in hospital to have the remains removed. So I'd say, Minister, your consultation is based on information that will cause such harm to people with miscarriages they won't answer it, and you won't get the information about how many employees will have come forward to say that they are miscarrying or they have miscarried because their employers and the fear of the HR rules currently, they won't come forward with it. So I'm very concerned on that. Yes, Minister, if you want to.
I appreciate the member giving way, and I thank her for the way in which she has approached this very sensitive topic as well. But I would just like to make it clear that we're not insinuating anything when we're putting these questions down. What we're trying to do is make it as open as possible and say, we're saying to people, tell us what it is that you think, how this should apply, when it should apply. And I think if you look at the wording, from our point of view, what we're actually trying to do is say, look, we're coming here with no preconceived ideas. We're simply wanting you to tell us. And I can understand why many people might not want to take part in that consultation. But I don't think that that's a reason for us not opening this up to consultation and saying to people, we want to hear. Because for everybody that might say, I don't want to take part in that consultation, there will be others like yourself who said at the start, I want to be included and I want to be involved. That's why I think this is the best way forward.
Thank you, Minister, but I come to my main point on Amendment 4. Amendment 4, the new Clause 3, is asking or is going to bring forward a report, not legislation. I'm sorry. My grief at 16 weeks or 12 weeks or 6 weeks of pregnancy loss is exactly the same as someone who is 24 weeks plus 3 days. I'm not different. I'm not a report. I deserve legislation, and so do all the other mums and dads out there. That's why when I saw the Amendment 3 Clause 2 coming forward that includes miscarriage from the very start, I thought, do you know what, looking at that, that's what we need. That is what we need. We need parents who have suffered baby loss to be included from day one, not excluded with the possibility of a report a couple of years down the road. I'm sorry, Minister, I can't agree with you on that. Now, when it comes to the money side of things, what I will say is, you've 12 months. If these amendments from the committee go through, there are 12 months. Why not have a conversation, a real conversation with people who have miscarried during that 12 months, and you will actually find out how many of us actually go to our employers and request for that time off, who actually want to even be involved in this. The very fact that that these amendments will at long last allow parents who have miscarried or have had miscarriage to not be treated as the taboo, to be able to come forward and say, I've had a loss and I need a bit of time. Now, I noticed in the bill one thing I would like to point out to all of you, and it was one of the things I thought about amendment, and it hasn't come forward so far. It's, if I could just find it here, under the rates of rate and period of pay on page 6, line 16, I believe, number 5 there. So it says there, for the purposes of subsection 2, the qualifying period is to be determined in accordance with regulations, which must secure that it is a period of 56 days beginning with the date of the child's death. When you miscarry, you don't know when your child has died inside you. You only know the date that you've had the confirmation of the negative pregnancy test quite often, and I know that's quite callous to say that. It's very hard to say that. Why 56 days? Why is it not 56 weeks? Because the anniversary of a child's death is one of the hard... I will do.
I think the Department have previously clarified that that will be 56 weeks in legislation. Yeah.
Thank you for that, because it is very hard for me to understand why you think that 56 days is the only time that you grieve for a child. The anniversary of a child's death can often trigger such deep sorrow in a couple, in a family. And siblings, when they get the opportunity to celebrate their brother or sister's death, it's a hard time. So 56 weeks, that would be fantastic for that clarification. So, just in conclusion, I would love, when I saw Amendment 4 at the start, I thought, oh, they're going to ask people with miscarriage what they actually think. And then when I read it, Minister, I have to say, back to school on this one. Language is key with baby loss. The language used in your amendment in Clause 4 is an amendment that will appear on the face of a bill. That language is horrendous. That language, as a bereavement counsellor, is not good enough. That language shows that this is all about money and not about people, and I understand it's coming from economy. I once helped the Department of Health write a bereavement leaflet to do with couples who had had miscarriages following IVF. The sort of language that people were coming out with at the very start was callous, and we got it changed to be more user-friendly. That amendment is callous, and that's why I can't, 1, accept it because of the language, 2, because it is defining people who have miscarried as something separate, something different, something unusual, something, whether they should be entitled or not, it's already setting out a scene that's not good enough. Therefore, I will be, to be honest, supporting the committee amendments. I can support your amendment number 10, because it adds in miscarriage to the long title. But at this stage, I think that the assumptions about the consultation are wrong. And I think about the amount of money that you think this is going to cost is wrong. Because when you actually look at how many people, and that's why I have a motion laid in this House, actually asking for a register of miscarriages that happen at home, which the majority of them do, that are notified to GPs, which some of them are, and the very few that appear in hospitals, so we can actually get some sort of figures on this. And believe me, I would not have been going to any of my employers, even with this coming forward, to ask for miscarriage leave, because unfortunately my miscarriages were all early, and it wasn't the time for me to tell my employer. there will be a lot of people like that. And you have to prove that you've had a miscarriage. That negative pregnancy test is how you prove in an early pregnancy that you've lost. So, Minister, there's a lot of work to be done. I think at this stage how we get it done is to put miscarriage into the legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Mr Jerry Carroll.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and thank Kelly Armstrong for a powerful testimony again. Deputy Speaker, the aim of this bill ought to receive the support of every MLA in the Chamber. I add my voice to those welcoming the bill. It's a long time coming and, dare I say it, quite a shocking indictment of our society and its employment practices that here we are in 2021 and only now debating concrete legislative support to provide bereavement pay and leave toward workers who are parents and who have had to face the greatest of all fears, losing a child. Everyone across our society during the pandemic has grown to value the role of our frontline workers, and the COVID pandemic has brought new onus to recognising the role that workers play in our society, but it has also shone a spotlight on things like low pay, lack of support and legal protections for those workers. One area that has been highlighted is the lack of legal support and protection for workers who face bereavement amidst a health crisis where far too many people have had to bury loved ones. And my heart goes out to every single parent in the world who has had to cope with losing a child. So I support the bill. I also raise to support Amendment 1 and all the consequential amendments that follow the move to include those who have experienced miscarriages. And I support, obviously, stillbirths being included, although not in the amendments today. It is entirely appropriate to include miscarriages in this legislation, and I welcome the debate at the committee level has brought this about. I will support Amendment 1, and I hope that passes instead of Amendment 4, which I do not support, because I don't feel it is necessary to consult on this issue over a 2-year period, nor do I want to see a situation where this chamber picks and chooses which people experiencing miscarriages are or aren't worthy of this support. This is obviously a very difficult subject and one that must be approached with the utmost sensitivity and respect. No parent should ever have to grieve for a child, but it's an awful reality for some parents, and there's a duty on decision makers and leaders to provide as much support as possible for those who have to face this traumatic, life-changing experience. And for that reason alone, this legislative move to provide for parental bereavement pay is a welcome one, and this bill would obviously bring things here in line with legislation across the water where such provision already exists. As I say, it's quite an indictment on our society. This Assembly is only doing this now, and we're playing catch-up with Britain. Up until now, employed parents who have found themselves dealing with bereavement have been left to deal with this alone with their employers without any legislative support in place for paid time off work. No doubt there are many employers who treat this issue with compassion and humanity and have their own provision in place when it arises, but as we have heard, there are also employers who don't have decent provisions in place, who don't meet these situations with the humanity and compassion that is needed. It is frightening to think that in this context, in what is their worst hour of need, some parents are not supported properly and then have financial and employment concerns heaped on top of their grieving process. This legislation can help correct this wrong and therefore is clearly welcome. But as welcoming this legislation, I also wish to raise the important contact I have had with the Coalition of Bereaved Workers, a campaign which has broad support from the trade union movement as well as a number of charities. The Coalition has stated how the Parental Bereavement Leave and Pay Bill is a crucial first step, but once it becomes law, we need to go further still and grant the same protections to everyone who is bereaved of a close relative or partner. That would ensure that so many more people are given the time, space and financial security they need to begin grieving away from work. I'm glad to say that my party and councillors in Belfast and Derry Council have proposed motions to those respective councils based on the Coalition's call to action and hope to secure 2 weeks bereavement pay for all workers affected by the bereavement of a close relative. I hope these local councils lead the way on this issue and others follow, because crucially going forward we must listen to the voices of those impacted by bereavement, parents, workers, their trade union representatives, in the hope that these voices are heard and are allowed to strengthen this legislation if it needs strengthening. So I look forward to doing this, and if I could play a role in helping one person that has been faced with losing a child or another relative, it would be a worthwhile endeavour indeed. I have to say, in conclusion, Deputy Speaker, I'm very concerned yesterday in the discussion about domestic abuse leave and parental bereavement bill today, there's a focus on financial cost. Frankly, I think this is obscene. We shouldn't be counting pennies and pounds when we're talking about dealing with extremely difficult and traumatic experiences for people. The focus should be on supporting those who need help and support and time off, and not prioritising financial concerns. So I hope the Minister takes that into account when coming forward and respond to the debate today. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Principal Deputy Speaker. And before I begin, I wish to thank the Committee Chair and the Committee for their work on this bill during committee stage. We all share a desire to ensure that we provide the best level of support for working parents in Northern Ireland who find themselves in heartbreaking circumstances of losing a child. Fewer experiences could be worse for any parent or carer, and it is right that anyone who finds themselves in that terrible situation has all the support and the help that they require. I also want to thank members who have spoken today and all who have contributed during the passage of this bill. I especially wish to take a moment to acknowledge the instances of personal loss and suffering which have been experienced and which have been bravely shared with this chamber. That's not an easy thing to do, but it goes to demonstrate that those of us tasked with the role of legislator often face these dreadful events in our own lives and in our own families. When this bill was first brought to the Executive by my colleague Diane Dodds, it was in recognition of the fact that bereaved working parents here were not provided with the same level of support that is given to bereaved working parents across the rest of the UK. It was also recognised at that time that we had an extremely short window of opportunity remaining in this mandate, but that this was a priority for her and the Department, and I share that desire to ensure that we close that gap. There are many employment law issues which, given the limited time we have and the challenge of responding to COVID-19, must wait until the next mandate to be addressed, and parental bereavement leave and pay could easily have been one of those issues. But in recognition of the singular importance of parental bereavement and of the opportunity to secure passage of a very specific bill in the remainder of this mandate, Diane decided not to wait. That was the right thing to do then, and it is still the right thing to do now. The tight focus on the time remaining was also one of the key reasons why this bill was solely focused on the issue of parental bereavement, trusting that it would secure the support needed and ensuring that the required secondary legislation would be straightforward and in place at the earliest opportunity of April 2022. Officials both here and in the Assembly and in my own department, my predecessors as Minister and indeed committee members, have worked tirelessly to ensure we achieve this date. And unfortunately, the passage of this bill is now facing a real threat. Whilst I acknowledge that the proposed amendments moved by the Chair of the Committee are undoubtedly well-intentioned, worded as they are, they're likely to scupper this legislation. Were this bill to progress, with the committee amendments incorporated, it would be likely to push the introduction of parental bereavement leave far beyond April 2022, most likely to April 2024, due to the extensive system changes that would be required in HMRC and from payroll software developers, and the requisite notice periods needed before development work can begin. The amendments also run the risk of disrupting the content of the bill so comprehensively that it may not be possible to implement it at all due to potential unintended consequences and possible ruinous repercussive costs. I'll give way to the member.
I appreciate this is a point to some extent which we have covered, but I don't know if there's any more detail the Minister can give in terms of the time frame, because obviously one of the major differences between his amendment and the Department's amendment and the amendment in the name of the committee is the time frame, as to whether this is achievable within 1 year. So I don't know if there's any more detail he can give the House on the timeline as to what would be that, because again, knowing from experience in terms of the length of time that these things take, I think the House does need to know what is realistic and what isn't.
I appreciate the intervention from the member, and I refer to previous comments from other members. The Chair of the Committee said it's up to me to lay this out, and Mr Dixon said I do not pretend to understand all of what the Minister has laid out, so I want to take a little bit of time to do just that and to explain why 12 months is not a realistic prospect for this to be brought in. Once royal assent is granted, for the SRs to be drafted and in place would take 4 months, but then we also have the miscarriage policy development process commencing, including research, benchmarking, impact assessments, cost assessments, drafting of the consultation paper and engagement with the committee if required. It's likely to take 4 months. It then has to go to the Minister for the approval and consultation of the document, and then there's further engagement with the committee and executive approval, another 6 weeks. 10 weeks for the consultation process, including 2 weeks that would be lost over Christmas. Departmental analysis and assessment of the consultation responses would take 4 weeks. Ministerial approval of the departmental response and engagement with the committee to seek executive approval would take another 6 weeks. 4 to 6 months then to commence drafting of the regulations. Of course, this may take longer than usual as there's no GB template to follow. Of course, that will also require extensive engagement with DSO and across NICs. 4 weeks for the draft rules to be made. And then if SRs are approved by the Assembly, commencement could be October 2023. However, the introduction date for the new employment right would be April 2024, as all new employment rights commence at the start of the new tax year. So that's why that will be pushed back to that period of time. I have said this to members time and time again in this chamber. I have taken the time over the last 24 hours to meet with the larger parties, in some cases twice. I have offered further meetings to explain this is why we need to accept my own amendments. Otherwise, it will not be the case that these will get through in April 2022. That's why there's a very clear choice for this House, and I give way to Ms Armstrong.
Thank you very much, Minister, and I thank you very much for laying out that timescale. However, we've just come out of COVID where things could be turned around quite quickly. Could I ask the Minister, can you please be careful with your words, because what this sounds like to me is parents who have miscarried on one side holding back everyone else who has lost a child, and that's how it comes across. Can we please just accept the fact that there are ways that we can do things quicker in this place? We've done them quickly. We maybe haven't done them exactly right quickly, especially during COVID with some of the grants, but where there's a will, there may well be a way.
And I think that there is a potential for us, if we go down the proper consultation route and the process that I had outlined that would follow in my own amendments. Of course, if we can hurry that up, I would want to see that happen. However, there are lots of competing priorities. You have to realise the small size of my employment law team. You have to understand that there's a number of regulations that have to be brought in. You have to understand there's a number of competing bills as well that will be taking up their attention. We were only here yesterday debating another employment bill. There's other private members' bills that are coming through. And in addition, as other members have said, there's a number of outstanding employment issues before this House, including the need to have a full employment bill because of all the other issues that still need to be addressed. This is not a case of us taking our time or not progressing this. These are timelines that are fairly accurate in the way that the process goes. Very, very hard to quicken these up. And it is only right, because of the seriousness of this issue, that we give these the attention that they deserve.
Appreciate the Minister giving way. In a previous piece of legislation that I did some work on, actually Ms Armstrong did too, the licensing bill, there was an amendment that I laid creating an obligation on the department to do a review. The department's the amendment was successful. The amendments were successful at consideration stage, and one of the what the committee did, what the department did at further consideration stage, they didn't want the amendments to pass in the first place, and the minister said the department said it wasn't going to be achievable in the time frame, and then at further consideration stage they took a regulatory making power to give them, if they required more time, they could come back to the Assembly and ask for more time via I think it was by negative resolution if required. Is that not possible in this case? Would it not be possible for the department to come back at further consideration stage with an amendment that included, for example, a regulatory making power, giving them more time specifically on the miscarriage component, should that be necessary?
So if it was a small technical change to extend the amount of time for these regulations to come in, that would help. However, because of the nature of the way in which the amendments were drafted, they all stick together. So yes, you could give us more time to do that. However, it would still push back the parental bereavement leave and pay element. And I take the point that Ms Armstrong has made. This is not about pitting people against each other. but it's already been a number of years since this was introduced elsewhere in GB. Why can't we take those two issues, pull them apart? The work has been done, an extensive amount of work, to get this ready for April 2022. Let's do that, and then let's find that other way to progress the miscarriage legislation as much as possible. And I actually get Ms Flynn was at least honest about it. She said that she would rather have nothing in 2022 and everything in 2024 because she wanted the two to go through together. If that's the will of the House, so be it. But you have to understand that that will be the consequence. If we are keeping these things tied together, it will be 2024 before they're implemented.
Mr. Forgiven Way, and the reason why I personally do not want to see stillbirth and miscarriage divided, or a child who dies after birth being divided off from miscarriage, is because of the mental health harm it does already cause parents who are miscarried, who are hidden away behind curtains in hospitals because nobody wants to catch that miscarriage bug. It is something that has harmed women in particular for years. So let's not do that. Let's not fall down that pathway. And Minister, I would hope that you could recognise that this is wider than your remit, your portfolio in economy. This is about the mental health and well-being of parents, in particular women who lose children during miscarriage. If we tell them you're too difficult or your loss is not the same, that will cause harm. And that's not, I think it's an unintended consequence that needs to be considered.
Mr. Principal Deputy Speaker, I don't think that anybody could have listened to the debate that took place in the House today and say that in any way we want to treat people, families who have gone through miscarriages any less than anywhere else. But it is simply the reality that the work has been done and progressed on this single issue. And I want to see progress and movement on both, but I don't want to see them delayed to that point. And that's why my amendment has gone through. That's why I have tried to work with the committee to get to a point where we could find agreement. And so I quite clearly say to the House again today, this is the option that we have in front of us. We can go for parental bereavement leave and pay in April 2022 and commit, and I will expedite that as much as I can, to bringing forward that consultation report on miscarriage, but we're not going to be able to get that in before 2024 anyway. So what do we want? Do we want to get both of them in 2024, or have one in 2022 and then work on the other and give it the time and the consultation and the serious consideration that it requires? I want to move on to talk a little bit in and around the financial implications. And before this bill was introduced, it received the unanimous support and backing of my executive colleagues. And the executive support was for a bill with an estimated cost of £100,000 per year. And I know that we would all share the same belief that you cannot put a value on the death of a child. To attempt to do so actually misses the underlying aims that this bill seeks to achieve. But not only does this bill aim to guarantee a modest level of financial support to bereaved working parents, it sets a benchmark and very much a baseline against which all employers must compare. And many good employers already provide comprehensive support for bereaved working parents that goes well beyond the levels outlined in this bill. And like all family-related employment legislation, this aims to set the minimum level of support that employers must provide, a safety net below which no employee should fall. Good employers lead, and all employers should be expected to follow in supporting their staff much more than this at a time when they most need it. And when we discuss the financial implications of these amendments, we are therefore not examining the value of a child, for that is unmeasurable. But as elected representatives, we are entrusted by those who have elected us, and the trust that has been placed in us ensures that we don't lightly reach difficult decisions, including those involving public finances. It ensures that we carefully weigh up and consider the implications of our spending decisions. That's why we have an Assembly and an Executive, why we have committees and departmental officials engaged in policy development and public consultation, all to ensure that we are responsible in our approach and that spending decisions are made following due and careful consideration of detailed policy development and public consultation. We should not allow ourselves to fall into the trap of judging the success or failure of the mandate based on the volume of new law that we create. As the former President of the UK Supreme Court, Lord Newberger, said in his Tom Sargent lecture in 2013, there is a welter of ill-conceived legislation, poor in quality and voluminous in quantity. The result is little more than the illusion of action without much in the way of the reality of achievement, coupled with uncertainty and confusion about the law. And let me be clear, I am fully supportive of the need to support working parents who suffer the heartbreak of miscarriage. I have said as much consistently throughout the committee stage of this bill. But I also fully support following the proper processes of policy formulation, consulting on and assessing the unintended consequences of legislation, and ensuring that new law, well-intentioned as it may be, is both necessary and easily implemented. I'll give way.
Thank you to the Minister. I'm sort of going to go back, if I may, just to one of the comments he made earlier on about the binding. Court his argument seems to be about the binding together of the miscarriage provisions with the broader provisions of parental leave. Just out of interest, given that both Amendment 1 and Amendment 3 involve insertion at end, so application in relation to, in both cases it is adding miscarriage, it's application in relation to miscarriage, coming after application in relation to stillbirth. Now, would it not be possible, given he's saying that the upshot of what he seems to be saying is that passing these amendments today means that forevermore, unalterably, you couldn't, for example, at further consideration stage, make the miscarriage amendments subject to what we talked about before, a negative resolution in the Assembly where the power to come back and review was extended should the Department need more time? Wouldn't it be possible to simply add a further amendment at the end of either of these, at the end of either the revised Clause 2 or the revised Clause 1, to say that these provisions are subject to the timing is subject to approval via negative resolution of the Assembly, subject to the other, the review clause that we talked about, if I'm making sense?
I think I know what the member is saying, but that wouldn't take away, though, from the commitment that there is to make sure that these are brought in together. So it would still mean that the 2022 date wouldn't be possible for parental bereavement leave and pay. That's the issue. Because of the way in which it is drafted, the two are together. I'm more than happy to give way to the member if he's looking for further clarification on that point.
Thank you. I appreciate the Minister giving way. But is the Minister? But what I'm asking is it his view that it would not be possible to amend the bill at further consideration stage if it was necessary? And I'm not, I suppose, conceding either on my own behalf or on behalf of the committee that it is necessarily necessary. But is it the position that they can't be, as it were, decoupled at all in a way that allows the provision to come in, the provision of everything but miscarriage to come in April 2022 and the miscarriage provisions to come in later? It would seem to me to be strange that that's completely out of scope for further consideration stage. I'm just asking the question.
I suppose the short answer to that is I wouldn't be able to say with any degree of certainty that that would be the case. As we know, at further consideration stage, that is mostly for technical adjustments. I think what you would be proposing would perhaps be considered a significant. But again, this is the reason why it's important that this is well thought out, that we discuss this, that we look at all of the potential implications of it. But if I get further clarity on that, I will give it to you. But I think the important thing to realise is that it's normally very unusual to undo what is done at consideration stage at a further stage, but if I can provide further information on that to the member, I will. I was saying that around the issue of miscarriage, this is why I have tabled my own amendment and why I believe it is a reasonable and appropriate compromise. It does place that statutory obligation on the Department to consult on policy options for miscarriage, and I think that by listening to the House today although we of course cannot bind a future Assembly or Executive, I think it would be the clear will of the House that those recommendations would be given very careful consideration. But I've set out the difficulties already in and around that for us to do right now, and I just want to remind members that this bill is the result of painstaking work carried out over a number of years involving wide-ranging consultation with members of the public, employer and employee representative groups and other stakeholders. And substantial, in-depth legal advice has been taken, and that's how legislation should be developed with due care and with the close involvement of a number of significant stakeholders. And I think that if we are to proceed without the proper consultation and policy in this way, that it shows disregard for the process. I want to come...
Thank you, Minister. I appreciate that. You said that your amendment effectively is saying that your intention is that it's reasonable to consult. I think where the interface between that and the committee is that we believe, and the reason why the amendment is present is because reasonable to consult is not sufficient to deliver the imperative to provide for miscarriage, and it allows too much. It allows too much latitude going forward. The department cannot be bound by that going forward. That is why there's a sincere intention to include a requirement in the legislation today.
Okay, so we've two issues here. We have, first of all, the consultation process and the way in which we properly develop and make sure that we're finding out the views of stakeholders here. This will take a little bit longer than the impossible timeline that has been presented through the chair of the committee's amendment. So regardless of the way in which it's brought in, it is still going to take time. It's still going to be 2 years before this could be brought in. My amendment says, why not use some of that time to consult and to see what it is that people actually think and what potential unintended consequences could be. So I think that's a fair way of doing it. The 2024 miscarriage pay can't be brought in until then anyway. So why wouldn't we then use that time to also consult beforehand? And again, I would point you back to the comments that have already been made around this House. We see the clear direction. I think that gives some comfort to members as well. I had advised the committee of 2 sets of cost. The first set resulting from the removal of the 26-week qualifying period and for the addition of miscarriage amounted to £3 million per year, with set-up costs raising this figure to £4.5 million in the first year. The Executive supported this bill on the understanding that the cost would be £100,000, not £3 million, not £4.5 million, and certainly not £104.5 million in its first year alone, and potentially £103 million each year after that. And members did hear me correctly, that's costs of over £100 million per year is the risk. The first set of costs, £3 million per year, is 30 times the original amount, and the second set of costs, about which the committee was also advised, are the potential repercussive costs of making this provision throughout the UK, in line with the parity principle, which risks losing the executive budget over £100 million per year.
The Minister give way.
I'll give way on that point, yep.
Thank you, Mr. Principal Deputy Speaker. And the Minister is right to raise real potential financial risks to the Executive. Has the Minister engaged with the Finance Minister or the Treasury around these issues?
Yes, Mr. Principal Deputy Speaker, I have. I had raised this issue following on the request from the Economy Committee, and they had sent a response to us in which they have set out the potential repercussive cost. This is from the Department of Finance, who spoke to the Treasury, and the Department of Finance has told us that in addition to the extra cost of £2.3 million, there remains a risk that if the UK Government is required to restore parity as a result of the amendments made to the Northern Ireland Parental Bereavement Bill, Treasury could seek to recoup the cost of doing so from the Executive's DEL budget, and the committee chair had referred to that either. So there would be an estimated liability for Northern Ireland that would be £100 million per annum. And it is important, as I said earlier on, that I had put that on the record, as that is a risk that is there. And I would refer members to the concordant between the Department for Work and Pensions and the Department for Communities, the Memorandum of Understanding between the UK and devolved administrations, the Northern Ireland Act 1998, sections 28 and 87, and the Social Security NINGB Reciprocal Arrangements Regulations 2016, and the Belfast Agreement, paragraph 26E, which sets out the risk that we have in terms of repercussive costs. And I had mentioned earlier on how the Treasury, through the welfare reform debacle, had also applied that reduction to the block grant. So it's something that everybody might not be familiar with, but it is important that whenever we're considering these amendments that we have our eyes wide open, and experienced legislators in this House and on the committee will be familiar with the very real legal and financial risk. So these amendments could potentially increase the cost of the bill by over 1,000 times, and it is important that we take that into consideration in this debate. The amendments fundamentally change the very fabric of financial accountability and responsible, transparent public policy making and government. And I don't want us to be placed in the position as an Assembly where we're being accused of not supporting those who have experienced loss through miscarriage when nothing could be further from the truth. That's why I believe that my amendment will allow all members to vote for this bill, safe in the knowledge that they are securing parental bereavement leave and pay for bereaved working parents by next spring, April 2022, which is only 4 months away, and also safe in the knowledge that they will also have secured a firm commitment in legislation to public consultation on how we can support those who experience miscarriage. I'm proud to be here today supporting bereaved parents. I'm proud to bring this bill to the Assembly, and I am proud that my executive colleagues have supported the introduction of this bill. However, I cannot support what I'm afraid looks like a reckless disregard for the finances of this executive, with hundreds of millions of repercussive costs as a result of how these amendments would be tabled. And yes.
I just want to clarify something, if I may, on the repercussive effects question. In relation to the specific advice his department sought, he said that effectively, I think, if I'm understanding correctly, the Department of Economy spoke to Finance, who spoke to the Treasury. Now, the note we got quoted the Statement of Funding Policy, which is in relation to devolved. That was not, I presume, a bespoke piece of advice which came from HM Treasury about this policy. I mean, is he aware it was a specific piece of advice sought from either Finance or the Treasury on the potential repercussive effects of this policy, or a reference to the general Statement of Funding Policy?
I would refer the member to the letter that I sent to the Economy Committee, and that details how the Department of Finance engaged with HM Treasury, and that was the response that they had come back with. So the member's now aware, as other members are, of the implications of this that we have had as a result of direct communication with the Department of Finance and the Treasury. I want to touch a little bit on the committee scrutiny and the deliberations on this bill, because departmental officials met with the committee on 4 occasions, sometimes at very, very short notice. I myself wrote to the committee on a number of occasions. I sought to reach agreement with the committee. I met with parties within this House. And so I do take exception to the comments from Stuart Dixon when he said that my department didn't work with the committee. I don't think that that is fair, and I will stand up for my officials and recognise the amount of work and the time and effort that they put in. We're very much keen to work with the department. But I committed the department to undertaking a full consultation into miscarriage leave and pay, and I strengthened that with an undertaking through this amendment to copper fasten the commitment to a consultation by including it in the bill, in other words, by giving it legal effect. This is now subject to the law. No stronger commitment or statement of intent could have been given. The committee was also provided with clarification on approximately 100 separate queries. That clarity was comprehensive, it was detailed, it was time-consuming, and it was provided without delay. Detailed responses. No query went unanswered. Officials under my express instruction were at the committee's disposal throughout their deliberations. And so you can imagine my dismay that after hearing that the committee, after they'd completed their examination of this bill, and after they had issued their report, and after they had written their miscarriage amendment, at that point they chose to seek further detail and clarity from my department on repercussive costs. Yes, the committee sought this information after the report had been published and after their amendments had been tabled. Yes.
Prior to the clause by clause, and then we sought some further clarity because we hadn't got the exact detail we were looking for. So just to put that on the record.
The emails here in front of me that state that that is not the case and that the information was requested afterwards, and I'm more than happy to share those with the member afterwards. Yes.
This is just very important because I think it's important to get the reading of this on the record. The response that we got from the Economy Department is clear that the DOF engaged with Treasury on the cost of the executive, the direct cost of the executive of the amendments at an annual cost to the executive. In a sense, you wouldn't expect the Treasury to say anything else about whether it's cost. Now, that's separate from the knock-on repercussive effects of kind of UK-wide policy of maintaining parity. My reading of the response that we have is that there was specific advice on the cost of the amendments in NI, and then a more general statement on relating to the statement of funding policy. I don't think there was specific guidance, unless I'm wrong, from HM Treasury about a potential repercussive effect of this policy. It was a general reference to the statement of funding policy.
I can quote from what I've got in front of me, which says that DOF engaged with HM Treasury on the financial impact of the committee's amendments. So my reading of that is that not only was it about the additional cost that we have as a result of breaking parity and having to fund the Northern Ireland contribution to this, but that engagement also led to HM Treasury supplying that statement from their funding policy. Oh, that's useful to the member. So we should seriously consider the opportunity that my amendment gives, which is for proper and due consideration of the issue of miscarriage through a detailed consultation in the matter, a blank canvas with nothing ruled out. And is there a mistaken belief that the committee's amendment can be voted on and then tidied up at further consideration stage? Because that's the risk of the executive losing over £100 million per year. Thinking that can be tidied up at further consideration stage. And if that were to come to pass, we all know the impacts that would have. As a minister going through budget discussions at the minute, I know the impact that could have as well. But again, I go back to the point that I had made before. The committee amendments could push both parental bereavement leave and pay and miscarriage leave and pay back to 2024. And even if this bill could progress now without amendments, royal assent could barely be obtained in time. And whilst it will be tight, my officials would work flat out to get the parental bereavement secondary legislation in place for April 2022. And there will, of course, be preparations for an Assembly election in the midst of this. There will be a new executive with its own set of priorities. And as I've said before, it would be impossible to consult and introduce miscarriage legislation within 12 months of royal assent. And how could I burden my department with an impossible deadline, which, in failing to achieve it, sets it at being at the mercy of being in breach in the law? Who could do such a thing? What minister could do that and accept a deadline in the full knowledge that it will place their department and officials in breach of the law? That's just not appropriate. And so, look, I think I've explained to members why this is simply not going to work, and the impossible situation that I will be placed in and decisions that I will have to make in relation to pulling this bill if we have unworkable amendments that put us at risk in this way. That would have meant that as an Assembly and as a committee we would have failed to support bereaved working parents and those who have suffered a miscarriage by failing to get this legislation in place and securing a public consultation on it. And I know that committees are working flat out to ensure that they are playing their part in ensuring that every outstanding bill is being progressed with the minimum of delay, but there is a real risk to that. I hope that this is not the case. I hope that this bill will not be rendered unworkable because of a well-intentioned but ill-considered amendment. Every minister that has held office will be able to recall an example of where they've been forced to resist such an amendment. Indeed, I can cite many examples from ministers from the very same parties which the members of the committee represent, and they have highlighted and challenged their committees, or those that have brought forward unattainable amendments, that they should not be doing the same thing as is now happening. And here's one quote: "I am concerned that they were never subjected to the full rigours of public consultation, executive consideration or committee scrutiny. I do not therefore believe that the threshold for proper consultation and participation on those amendments has been met." It was Mark H. Durkin of the SDLP. Another quote: "The role of consultation on significant issues was fundamental to the establishment of devolution here. Last-minute amendments on substantial issues with direct effects on everyone, even on small numbers of people, are not the way to do good government and not the way that we should operate in this place." David Ford of the Alliance Party, who went on to add, "I think it's entirely inappropriate that should be tacked on at the last minute to a bill with no consultation, the kind of consultation which I have to do on every other aspect of the bill. That's completely ignored by the last-minute amendment." And so what does it matter if a public consultation into miscarriage leave and pay has not been held? What matters is that it holds us to account. It is what prevents ministers and their departments from simply ruling by diktat or legislating on a whim. It robs the public, our constituents and stakeholders from right across society of the opportunity to have their say on matters which govern their day-to-day lives. So no matter how well-deserving an issue is, and make no mistake, miscarriage is a well-deserving issue, no matter how deserving an issue is, we owe it to everyone to make sure that we are custodians of public finances, guardians of law and servants of the people. We cannot just say that consultation is not important. Everybody should have an opportunity to influence, to inform, to debate and to otherwise play a part or secure a stake. Following that path, normalising the creation of significant and indeed groundbreaking new laws without recourse to public consultation, well, that just disconnects us further from the people who elect us. So, Mr. Principal Deputy Speaker, miscarriage is an issue that deserves our support. I'm not denying it. In fact, I am championing it. But it is the very nature of the worthiness of this issue that perfectly illustrates the risk of supporting the committee's amendments without proper consideration and consultation, without regard for the financial calamity that repercussive costs could reap for this Assembly. It would undermine the fundamental building blocks of good legislation and good governance that we are invested with upholding. Supporting committee amendments without due consideration and consultation could eventually expose us all to a legislative Wild West, to special interest-driven policy-making on the hoof, unaccountable and unfinanced laws in which society doesn't get its say, and in which we say costs, let someone else deal with it. I'll briefly give way to the member.
Minister, and I hear what you're saying. Of course, we want to make appropriate legislation, but I laid out for you very clearly why what you have put forward as Amendment 4 can't work. There is no legislation, there is nothing that measures how many people have miscarriages. The wording that is used in the Amendment 4 is very difficult for someone who's had a miscarriage to read. It's not a consultation, it's a report. And I have to say to the Minister, unless you're actually really valid on this, that doesn't actually respond to what you've put forward.
Look, I think I've referred to the member's intervention on this before. I think we're on a different page. I think this is giving people a voice. It's giving people an opportunity to have their say. This is a very open consultation. I think that's an appropriate move for me to make. So whenever we say costs, what costs? Let somebody else deal with them. And please remember that we are potentially putting that burden on our public services, on all of those public services that we are trying to support at this time, be it within our health service, within our education service, or other public bodies. This was intended to be a small bill, focused on one thing only, and not moving it further would not be something I would do lightly. It would be a decision reached with a heavy heart. But we are where we find ourselves, and that is unfortunate. So again, I say to the House, my amendment allows us all to achieve what is right for bereaved parents and work out what is right for those who suffer miscarriage. There remains an opportunity for us all to show that we can work together and achieve what is best for our citizens, to show that we can be responsible and face the difficult choices, making the right decisions. And I ask this chamber not to give their backing to the committee amendments, but to support my amendment. And I'll give way to the member.
Thank the member for giving way. I appreciate it. I think there is around the wording in terms of Amendment 4, and I appreciate the point that has been made by Ms Armstrong, who's probably got a level of expertise in terms of the language around this more than others. But I would then point in terms of, and if there is a level of disjoint in terms of the communication in relation to this, that the wording of the amendment in terms of what will be in the consultation talks about may include. So it is by its nature permissive. That means that none of the points which have been raised within that are essential elements of that level of consultation. They could change, other stuff could be added in. And I would like to think that before any consultation was arrived at, indeed views being sought, there would be appropriate work with those who have got expertise in this to make sure that precisely whatever was consulted with in terms of what was going to be brought forward, that the language would be got right so that those sensitivities aren't reached. So it's not a question of a shall, it's a may in terms of the wording.
What the member said, I think that's an important intervention, and thank him for it. Would urge members to reflect on that as well. So, look, I think there does remain an opportunity for us all to show that we can work together, that we can make responsible choices. And so I ask the Chamber not to give their backing to committee amendments, but to support my amendment. To pause, to allow my amendment to deliver parental bereavement leave and pay now, to allow for miscarriage to be properly consulted upon, to ensure that we do not burden the next executive with hundreds of millions in repercussive costs that may rob us of nurses, teachers and valuable public services. And I would like to ask the committee, what engagement did you have with DOF on this matter? I want to ask the committee, where is the policy that underpins the committee amendments and any resulting legislation? Where is the work that needs to be done to make sure that this is the right policy? I don't think the policy preparation exists. I don't think that it has happened. And I think that only the vaguest assumptions can be made about the impact of these amendments. And there are so many unanswered questions surrounding the inclusion of a miscarriage provision alongside parental bereavement. And I don't need to go into the various details of and scenarios that people can find themselves in. But this is a complex issue, and we need to make sure that this is properly considered, and how the outworkings of this would be felt. What scenarios have been considered? These questions cannot be answered, but these are the difficult, complex, thoughtful deliberations that would normally be worked through as part of a policy development and public consultation process. And I don't want to overlook all who might need support and run the risk of creating an unjustifiable equivalence between some sets of parents and others. That's unfair, and it's unfair on this Assembly as well. I think these amendments constrain proper Assembly scrutiny. Where are the accompanying evidence packs, the policy proposals, the impact assessments that will allow Assembly members to scrutinise, consider and inform our debate about these amendments? Where are the hundreds of points of clarification provided to the committee? The financial impact assessments, the equality impact assessments, the explanatory and financial memorandum, where are they? They don't exist. And Assembly members are being asked to reach a decision about a matter without having been given so much as a single page of policy detail to underpin the argument for these amendments. And it's why we now have, in this debate, Mr O'Toole asking me about potential amendments that we can take through at the next stage because we haven't properly considered what we may put through at this stage. I fully accept that there are instances where fast-tracking of legislation is required, and the pandemic over the last number of years have taught us that. It allowed the furlough scheme to be set up, it allowed us to amend the way maternity and other family-related statutory payments are calculated. And miscarriage support has undoubtedly become a hot topic for family-related employment law, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't afford the time in order to allow us to have a full consultation into it. This Assembly needs the time and the opportunity to properly consider and debate the matter. I believe that the public, working parents, miscarriage charities, employers and trade unions need the time and the opportunity to have a say through public consultation. I have to say, Mr. Principal, that I'm just coming to an end, but I will give way.
Minister, I thank you for saying and recognising that people need time. I've been involved with miscarriage for 27 years. How much longer do we have to wait?
Well, of course, that's one of the reasons why I am bringing forward these amendments as I am now, because I feel that parents who have lost a child have had to wait far too long as well. That's ready to progress, and I want that to progress now so they can have leave and pay, and I want to deal with this in the appropriate way. But I will just say this as I close, Mr. Principal Deputy Speaker, I have been extremely disappointed with how this debate and this issue has progressed. I have been sincere and genuine in reaching out to colleagues across this House. I have sought to work with them to highlight the concerns that I have, and I believe that I have made the arguments as to why this would be a better route for us to go down if my amendments are accepted. When I have challenged other members on that, they have not been able to give reasons for why they are continuing to push this through. So not only has there been a reluctance in the first instance to give this issue the proper consideration and scrutiny that it deserves, but even when that very real risk of this bill falling apart has been presented to them, there has not been the further interrogation or desire to see this issue sorted out. I find that really, really disappointing, and I just urge members to support my amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me, Minister. I call the Chairperson for the Economy Committee, Dr. Keith Archibald, to wind. Dr. Archibald.
And I want to start by thanking all members for their contributions to this afternoon's debate on what is a really important issue. And I think a number of members have very rightly pointed out the horrendous nature of the grief that parents suffer upon the death of a child. And I recall in the previous debate at second stage, a number of members in this chamber spoke of their own experiences, including myself and my own family's experience of losing a child. So I think that is very much, as Mr. Dixon says, at the forefront of our minds in terms of the discussions that we are having this afternoon. At the outset of this debate, I set out that the committee had taken a very strong interest in this bill from the get-go. We supported its aims. We very much want to see parental bereavement leave and pay put into law. And we welcomed the introduction, and we have considered this bill fully. We have listened to the evidence, and contrary to how the Minister has characterised it, we have put forward what we consider to be very well thought out amendments. I have listened to members right across the chamber this afternoon in their contributions. I want to thank Kelly Armstrong for again speaking of her own experiences in very generous terms, and both she and Arlia have outlined the very real impact that bereavement and pregnancy loss has in terms of someone's mental health, as well as their physical well-being and their workplace experience. And I think that that's something that we are very much mindful of in terms of our consideration in respect of this bill. Just wanted to pick up on a couple of points that members had made beyond that in relation to Jerry Carroll's point around the Coalition of Bereaved Workers. We did receive evidence from the Coalition of Bereaved Workers. It's not within the scope of this bill, but we did include their asks in terms of extending the provisions to all bereaved people in terms of our committee report. And hopefully that's something that the department will take on board in the time ahead. So just in relation to the substantive issues that we have covered this afternoon, and I've listened very carefully to the Minister's contribution, and I have listened to him say that it would be likely to delay things and it could delay things. Frankly, I have to agree with what Mr Dixon has outlined and Mr O'Toole, in that we need to approach this from a very problem-solving way, and in respect of the amendments that the committee has brought forward, they have been written, I understand, in such a way that they stand alone and that they can allow for the Parental Bereavement Leave and Pay Bill as introduced and the regulations in respect of that to be brought forward while the work continues in respect. Okay. Oh.
Principal Speaker, I was just agreeing with the Speaker.
I think the Minister has actually, frankly, had quite significant time to speak in respect of his own views, and I would like to respond. So that the work can now be done in respect of the miscarriage leave and pay, and to allow for that period of time to ensure that the consultation that he has referred to can be done. I take on board what he says around the time frame in respect of that, and I also listen to Ms Armstrong in respect of we have been able to do things a little bit quicker, so perhaps that is something that could be looked at. Or again, perhaps, as I said in my opening remarks, that's something we could look at in terms of further consideration stage in respect of that 12-month period that we have put in our amendment. So that's something that the committee would be willing to perhaps look at upon evidence from the Minister. I don't accept what the Minister has outlined in relation to the risk of repercussive costs as being anything very substantial. We have seen no precedents come forward. I take on board what he says about welfare for reform, but that was a very specific set of circumstances, and we've not seen any legal advice to suggest what the Minister has laid out in respect of those repercussive costs. I will give way.
I'm just staggered by what the member has said. Anyone who knows anything about repercussive costs would know that if the Assembly proceeds down this unique route within the United Kingdom, then inevitably there can and would be repercussive costs. So just to swipe it away and say, I don't accept it, isn't good enough, particularly from a chairman of a committee, frankly.
Well, as I... Go ahead.
And the member for giving way. As a member concerned that I am with today and yesterday at the very serious and traumatic experiences, there's an overwhelming focus on finance and cost, and not enough, apart from myself and other members, and the focus on how this people still in work, still not getting support, or actually the impact on them and their families by not progressing legislation such as this. Is she and the committee concerned about that line of travel being pursued by the Minister?
Well, frankly, what was considered by the committee was the fact that this is people's lives that we are considering, and obviously, we have budgets to live within and everything else, but we are wanting to provide support and compassionate support for workers at really difficult times. In relation to Mr Alistair's comments, we asked for examples, we asked for precedents, we weren't given any, we weren't offered any legal advice in respect of what was being suggested either. So I can only deal with what is presented to me. Príomh Concordia, we have an opportunity in terms of this piece of legislation that is being brought forward to enshrine before the end of this mandate progressive and meaningful provision for workers and their families, the right to statutory paid leave upon the death of a child or pregnancy loss, to ensure that there is compassionate support for workers to know they are valued and that they don't have to worry about taking unpaid leave, sick leave or annual leave in these really terrible circumstances, and that they have that statutory protection. I think that is an opportunity that this Assembly should grasp, and I would urge all members across this chamber to support the committee's amendments in Group 1.
Thank you. The amendment proposed to Clause 1, page 3, line 42. Insert the words as printed on the Marshall list. The question is that Amendment 1 be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Contrary, if any, no. The House will divide. Clear the lobbies. Order. Order. Members, please resume their seat. Before I put the question to the House, I would again remind those members present that, if possible, it would be preferable if we could avoid a division. The question is that Amendment number 1 be agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, if any, no. No. Okay. Do we have tellers? Order. Tellers have been appointed as follows. The tellers for the ayes are Nicola Brogan and Liz Kimmins. The tellers for the noes are Peter Weir and Keith Buchanan. Before the Assembly divides, I want to remind you that, as per Standing Order 112, the Assembly currently has proxy voting arrangements in place. Members who have authorised another member to vote on their behalf are not entitled to vote in person and should not enter the lobbies. I remind all members of the requirement for social distancing while the division takes place. I ask you to ensure that you retain a 2-metre gap between yourself and other people when moving around the chamber or the rotunda, and particularly in the lobbies. Please be patient at all times, observe the signage and follow the instruction of the lobby clerks. Clear the lobbies. The Assembly will divide. Ayes to my right, noes to my left. Order. Order. If I could ask members to resume their seats and the clerk to please read the result.
78 members voted, 51 members voted aye, 27 members voted no. The motion is carried. The amendment is carried.
The amendment is carried. I ask the clerk, or if I ask the doors to be unfastened, and if members would take their ease for a few moments for a change at the top table. Thank you. Members, if you'll indulge me, I'll try and keep the business moving rather than delay any more. The question is that Clause 1 as amended stand part of the bill. All those in favour say aye. Okay, we now move on. We now come to the second group of amendments. There's only... Oh, sorry, the contrary is no. I'll make that division again, sorry. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to the second group of amendments for debate. There's only one amendment, Amendment 2, which deals with Week 1 rights, and I call the chairperson of the Committee for the Economy, Dr Kiva Archibald, to move and speak to Amendment 2. Dr Archibald.
Margaret Priblas Cancorlia, and I rise on behalf of the Economy Committee to move Amendment 2, which is the single committee amendment in Group 2. This was the only amendment on which the committee divided, with a majority supporting the amendment. And again, I'd like to put on record my thanks to the bill clerks and the committee team for their help and support. Amendment 2 seeks to remove the 26-week qualifying period for pay and introduce a Day 1 right for all employees and workers. The issue of a Day 1 right was raised consistently by representative bodies across key sectors, including trade unions, human rights and bereavement charities. This is a view not only held by those representing employees, but was also expressed by business representatives as well. It was expressed by one committee member, quite poignantly, that it cannot be right that two employees working side by side and both impacted by parental bereavement could have differing rights based on their length of service. The committee was also particularly mindful of the impact of any qualifying period on 0 hours contract workers, agency workers and those on temporary contracts. The committee again engaged extensively with the Department on this issue. The Department estimated that a maximum of 40 parents would be impacted by the 26-week qualifying period, and that the cost of this would be above what would be commensurate with the number of additional persons that the change would benefit. Those figures, of course, are predicated on the bill as introduced, that is, not including workers who experience miscarriage. Therefore, the committee was clear that it would not be deterred from pursuing additional rights for employees and workers because of any barriers or pressures of time or by the prospect of increased costs, and has brought forward this amendment to be considered by the House today. I have already addressed the issues brought forward by the Department regarding the costs of breaking parity with Britain in the previous debate, and I would restate that the Department has not cited precedents where devolved administrations have become liable to fund in Britain breaks with parity here. Finally, I also wish to note for the record that the committee also recommended that the Department should undertake work to scope and bring forward proposals to allow leave to be taken in single days rather than 2 weeks to be taken together or in separate blocks of 1 week as specified in the bill. It was highlighted by some stakeholders who were of the view that leave should be flexible with options to take single days, acknowledging that grief does not follow any specific pattern. The committee trusts that this issue will be given due consideration by the Department and will be evaluated by the Department in due course. And just a few very brief comments. Príomh Concordia, as Sinn Féin Economy spokesperson, I don't have a great deal to add to what has been said, other than to say I am strongly of the view that the statutory protection and right to paid leave should not be subject to an arbitrary qualification period. It serves no purpose. If someone suffers a bereavement or pregnancy loss, they should be entitled to the same level of support regardless of how long they have been in a job. Neither the Department nor the Minister have offered any demonstrable evidence of their assertions in relation to the risk of breaking parity. This amendment, in my view, is simply the decent thing to do, and I would again urge members across this chamber to take a stand for workers and ensure the right to paid leave in really awful circumstances is enshrined in law from you start your job. Mr
Peter Weir.
Thank you, Mr Principal Deputy Speaker. I'll keep my remarks brief because I think there is a considerable level of crossover, at least particularly on the financial aspects with the previous set. I would be very concerned over this. There's no doubt, and again, I don't question the motivation of the committee's amendment. Again, there is good intentions within this, but I suppose, as the saying goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And the issue is this: not simply in terms of breaking parity, but the repercussive implications of this proposed change. The indications are, as was indicated by the Chair, that the direct cost in terms of the number of employees that this would directly impact on in any one particular year is relatively small. But it is less that, it is more the implications it has for wider employment law. There is a logical deduction which the Chair has already mentioned, which is why should two employees sitting side by side, one who'd only been there for a matter of days, one who'd been there for years, why should they be treated in any way differently? But if that is true of, for example, the parental bereavement, why is it not true in every other aspect of employment law? Where's the logic in terms of drawing any level of distinction? And if we are to change that, what are the cost implications across the board? Where does that leave in terms of any legal vulnerability when somebody in a different set of circumstances that challenges on that basis? This is something that could run into, the direct implications from the point of view of the changes. Will lead, even if the miscarriage provisions had not been put into place, it will lead to some additional costs in terms of the set-up costs of £1.5 million. It will lead to probably a small ongoing cost each year. But if the repercussion happens in terms of employment law across the board, then that is something which could lead into millions upon millions. So let us be clear about what we are potentially doing today in terms of breaking that level of parity. Now, the argument will go, and again, it is the case, that will that mean for a group of workers there will be a level of benefit to them? Yes, there will. But again, almost in my experience, if government and legislation was a choice between doing a good thing and a bad thing, or between funding a good project and defunding a bad project, then this would be very easy. But what becomes sort of stamped through government, like a sort of a mantra, like a stick of rock, is that you're, generally speaking, choosing between things that benefit different sets of people, things that are virtuous to different groups of people. It is between good things and good things that you're often choosing. And in doing so, with the repercussive costs of this particular change, in the change of employment law, undoubtedly that down the line this will lead to a considerable financial cost to the executive. Now, if we are to say, and given whatever resources that the executive has, it is not infinite, it does mean that, and this is not simply a matter of adding some additional cost onto things and that's the end of it. If you are spending an additional 5, 10, 20 million, 25 million, whatever the figure happens to be, it is money coming out of other sources. There's an opportunity cost, an economic opportunity cost. It will mean that other virtuous things you cannot do. Now, I would be a lot more comfortable with this amendment if it was a situation that, in terms of that opportunity cost, we are saying that to change employment law, to have the implications across other aspects of employment law, for example, in terms of industrial tribunals, etc., that this would lead to an additional cost of 10 million, and that, if you like, was sacrificed elsewhere. And if that was the argument that was made, I think I have to say there's a certain level of intellectual dishonesty in simply saying we're not at cost and they'll have no implications elsewhere. But we're not even at that point because we don't have a clue what the level of cost will be. And again, it comes back to the point that was made earlier. If we simply accept legislation, if we simply accept changes on the grounds of something that will have economic consequences, but we are effectively writing a blank cheque and do not know what level of cost that will be. You know, members in this House on previous occasions have been very critical about particular government schemes which have totalled up much greater cost than they were initially anticipated. But that is precisely what we are doing today. And we do it at least today with the eyes open that we are writing a blank cheque. And that is the problem which fundamentally lies at the heart of this. Why breaking parity on this issue, and there is no other way that this can be massaged, will lead to levels of direct cost to Northern Ireland. The member, I think the chair in the previous debate, referred to and correctly said that in terms of employment law, we do have a freedom of opportunity in terms of what we do in terms of employment law. But what that also means is that any choices that we make, it is from our budget that we will simply have to pay for that, leaving aside whether it creates any implications down the line in terms of a broad parity issue of money being drawn back in. And again, this leads to a scenario in which we are racking up additional costs, not simply in this one particular aspect, but setting the precedent, setting the legal opportunity for others to challenge on a range of other issues across the board as regards day one rights. And again, if that is being justified on the grounds of here's a figure that this will cost, and it is something we're willing to sacrifice in other areas to afford that, I can understand the argument on that. But we are simply today, if we pass this, putting in a blank cheque. So I oppose the amendment and my party will be opposing it.
Mayor Matthew Toole, Hon Cancha. I call Matthew Toole.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. There is just, as we've heard, one amendment in Group 2, so I will endeavour to be brief. As I said at the beginning of my remarks in the previous group, I was not on the Economy Committee when we began scrutinising this bill and considering potential amendments to it, but I commend both my predecessors, Neil McLaughlin, and the bill staff, and indeed colleagues from other parties for the work they have done. I and my party support the extension of the removal of the qualifying period for pay and the introduction of it as a day one right. I think it's worth just going back to some of the points that were made by the previous speaker, because of course they echoed a lot of the arguments that were made in relation to Group 1, the Group 1 amendments around creating provision for miscarriage in the bill. And the argument is, I think, a general one that we are setting perhaps an unhelpful precedent, and also that there are repercussive effects for which we are writing a blank cheque. I'm afraid it is important to say that though we have had, as I said in the previous group of amendments, though we have had a written communication from the department stating that the Treasury and the Finance Department here, or the Treasury via the Finance Department here, had said that the direct costs of these provisions would be borne by the Northern Ireland Executive. There wasn't clarity from either the Treasury or the Department of Finance on repercussive costs. So I think it is important to make that point. I'm not dismissing the idea of repercussive costs. I will give way in a second. Yes.
I thank the member for giving way. Would the member accept the logic of accepting this amendment? For example, if we take, for instance, in terms of employment rights on industrial tribunal, where there will be a qualifying period before somebody can take a case, for example, or indeed a range of other employment laws, if we are saying that it is justified that anyone in day one has to be treated in exactly the same basis as those who reach a qualifying period, that then would, there's no logical distinction between for example, in this case where it is leave for bereavement and a parental leave, and any other case, that once this has been accepted, it is very difficult to make an argument that there should be any level of division. Now, it's perfectly a reasonable argument to say that there shouldn't be any level of division, but I think what becomes intellectually dishonest is to say that this applies in this particular case, but actually a distinction is to be drawn in other cases.
He's making a point there about the intellectual and logical inconsistency of having this as a day one right in this legislation, but not having certain other employment rights as day one rights. Before I come on to whether there's an intellectual or logical inconsistency, that's not the same thing as there being a legal inconsistency. He's a trained lawyer, I'm not. Is he suggesting that us passing this amendment now would have a, if you like, legally repercussive effect on employment tribunals? I'm not sure that it would. That doesn't seem to me to be a credible argument that would be an argument in employment tribunals that people could say, well, I was dismissed for, I was dismissed during my probation period, but the Assembly has just passed a law in which certain rights around parental bereavement exist from day one. If that's what he's arguing, that doesn't seem to me to be plausible with respect. On the other point he made about intellectual and logical inconsistency, with respect, and I see the point he's making, but I don't completely accept that. The reason being that, as we have, I think, established today, issues around parental bereavement, baby loss, and indeed miscarriage are a very particular area that is extremely sensitive. This is an area that is not just sensitive, but it's devastating for people affected by it. I don't think intellectually or ethically it is that strange to make the point that, as the committee chair said, there is an ethical argument for saying that someone who loses a child on week or day one of a new job is entitled, or this Assembly should say they are entitled to equal treatment with a colleague who's been there for longer. To me, it is possible to make that argument while also saying, should we choose to say it, should the matter ever come up, that there are certain other employment rights which are subject to a probation period, or which do not necessarily have to be applied on day one or week one. So no, I'm afraid I don't accept that point, because I do think there is a clear, obvious and indeed ethical distinction, as we've unpacked and discovered today. But I thank him for his intervention. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I won't delay the House too long, other than to say, yes, there was a division in committee on this. I think the argument is made that there is a particular ethical burden on making these rights, if you like, instantaneous, or that there not being a qualifying period. I believe one of the arguments made by the department on the qualifying period was that a relatively small number of parents would be impacted by the qualifying period. 40. Well, I suppose the logical, to use the argument about logic, the logical corollary to that is that that's not that many parents who are going to create an additional cost. So I don't think the argument around exorbitant or runaway cost applies in this case, or I don't think it's fully made in this case. And I go back to the point, I will give way in a second once I finish this point, and I go back to the point that was made around repercussive costs, and I also go back to the point I've made around if there are particular other technical clarifications or additions that the department seeks to make, and then there is, of course, further consideration stage in that, and that is open to the department. I give way to the Minister.
I appreciate the member giving way. The point that my officials would have been making as they came before the department was that this is a very, very small number of people. So yes, the costs themselves are small, but of course it's not just those costs we have to worry about, it's the cost of setting up the new system, which would have been in and around the region of £1.5 million. So we had estimated that for those individuals that would be affected by this, you're talking in and around £10,000 a year. However, the cost of bringing that in would be £1.5 million. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't provide support to those people, which is why I wrote to the Minister for Communities to confirm that the Discretionary Support Fund would have been a vehicle through which those that were in need of financial support could get it. She had confirmed to me that that would have been the case. So hopefully he can see what the department was trying to do. Instead of bringing in a new system at the cost of £1.5 million, breaking parity, having to set up our own system, at a cost that would pay out something relatively small, we already have another support mechanism in place. That is a point that my departmental officials would have been making.
Okay, I acknowledge the point that the Minister is making there. I'll give way to the Committee Chair.
£1.5 million costs to set up the system for the day one right is the same as the £1.5 million costs for setting up miscarriage. It's either or both, so that's the same cost. And in relation to the discretionary support, obviously there are other eligibility criteria that apply to discretionary support, so it would only be available, for example, to people on lower incomes, and they would have to demonstrate that they were in financial stress to be able to access that support. So I'm not sure it's the most appropriate vehicle.
Indeed, I welcome that. Thank you for the Committee Chair for that amendment. I think she's for that intervention. She's made her points. I think, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this group of amendments, it's one amendment, adds to the important progressive ethical step forward that this legislation will hopefully represent, and it may involve more work, but at further consideration stage, if people feel that they want to bring further amendments. But I think today is an important moment where we can both address, as we did in the previous the previous debate, the question of applying this to people who have suffered miscarriage, baby loss, but also set down here the principle that these rights around broader parental bereavement should apply on day or week one of employment. So I and my party will be supporting them. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
I call Stuart Dixon.
Thank you very much. Deputy Speaker, I again will be very brief, just rise to support the amendment, to again emphasise the comments the Chair made, and indeed just looking at the minutes of our committee meeting, how members were commenting on the importance of this being a week one right, and that no one should face into the difficulties of bereavement, whether through miscarriage or stillbirth or early parental bereavement, that financial considerations should differentiate between them and other employees with longer service. And I think you also heard earlier in the earlier debate my colleague Kelly Armstrong indicating that finance was not the key or driving issue for someone in these particular circumstances. Just very briefly, Speaker, just to address the point that Mr Weir made with regards to different rates, if you like, of qualifying for various rights in employment law. In Northern Ireland, many years ago, the right to claim unfair dismissal was 26 weeks. It moved to 2 years, and it moved back to 1 year. And in Northern Ireland, we are out of step with the UK. In fact, we provide better rights in Northern Ireland than happens in the rest of the United Kingdom. When it comes to redundancy, redundancy is based on age and length of service. So there are whole different rafts and ranges of reasons why people will qualify under employment law. Much as I would like to see a great deal more harmonisation in respect perspective, all of that, and that would be an ambition that this House should be rising to. But in this particular case, we are sitting today with the opportunity to bring forward new legislation. We're sitting today with an opportunity to deliver for people a week one right, and I think that that's the right and proper thing for us to do. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thanks, Sir Liz Kimmins on couch. I call Liz Kimmins.
And I thank the committee for bringing this amendment. I think it's evident, you know, that the strength of feeling around this chamber in terms of this issue, and as others have said, the loss of a child is hugely traumatic for any parent to have to experience. It doesn't bear thinking about the massive impact this has on anyone who's suffered such a sad loss, regardless of at what stage it has happened. It has the same impact, and I thank Kelly Armstrong for being so frank in her personal account of the loss that she has suffered on many occasions. And as my colleagues have already stated, we are fully supportive of the implementation of the Parental Leave Bill. We believe all parents should be supported and get compassionate leave from their employment to give them the necessary time to grieve, regardless of how long they've been in that employment for. So we fully support this amendment from the committee to make bereavement leave a day one right, and believe it is wrong to try and make this leave only available for workers after they've served 26 weeks. I think it's essential that it is acknowledged that many workers here in the North, particularly those on 0-hour contracts, may experience breaks in employment and irregular periods of service through no fault of their own. And by implementing a qualification period, this would further marginalise and exclude so many of these types of workers. But I also think it's important to acknowledge that women make up the highest proportion of workers in this type of work for a range of reasons, including having to take employment breaks for childcare of other children. And this would mean that many women would be excluded from an entitlement to bereavement leave. Bereavement and grief is not something that any of us can plan or prepare for, and the purpose of this bill is to provide a compassionate legal framework. Therefore, we must do this comprehensively to ensure that no one is excluded during what is likely to be one of the most difficult times of their lives. And having the added worry of financial insecurity following the loss of a child is something that no parent should have to contend with. And I know Ms Armstrong did say that that's something that doesn't even enter your mind, but we should be doing all we can as a devolved institution to shape this legislation to ensure that this is not something anyone has to worry about and create further stress at a later stage. So I think, just in closing, I think a lot of the points that I want to say have been covered, but I think we have a real opportunity here to ensure that we are supporting all bereaved parents, regardless of their length of service and regardless of when they lost their child, because the gravity of that loss remains the same. So I think it's imperative that we do this properly so that no one is excluded.
And I call the Minister for the Economy, Gordon Lyons, to Wayne, please.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. And again, I just want to put on record my sense of disappointment in how we haven't been able to get to an agreed position in the Assembly on these issues. And I do agree with what other members have said, that these are issues that affect people that we know. They deserve to be treated with the utmost dignity and respect. And we need to be aware that we are dealing with issues that are very raw and hurt people not just for a period of time, but the pain and the loss that is felt by people can still be very acute, even after many years. So I am aware of the sensitivities around this issue. It's my responsibility as Minister to take all of these issues into consideration, and I don't intend to detain the House for much longer, because I think we've rehearsed many of these arguments already. However, I do think it's incumbent upon me to place on record the concerns that I have about the legal and financial risks and liabilities that we are potentially leaving ourselves open to as we depart from a long-standing and accepted practice for employment-rated statutory payments. And I think we also need to recognise that is a relationship between both employees and employers, and that the needs of both need to be taken into consideration. And where there are changes to employment law, it's important that that is signposted well ahead of time, because people are having to amend payroll systems and put in other changes as well. I do want to just place on record again the potential repercussive cost arising from this and the other committee amendments. That was articulated at great length in the previous debate, and I'm not going to go in that again, but this is again an amendment that will contribute substantially towards that £100 million that we risk bequeathing the next executive. Again, I think it's important that these issues are open to public consultation and full debate, and we have to recognise the way in which this opens us up, I suppose, to further unintended consequences in relation to impact on other statutory payments such as maternity pay, paternity pay, shared parental pay, adoption pay, and this amendment has a wider impact than this bill alone. They've all been carefully calibrated, these payments, over a number of years to sit within an agreed, readily understood employment law framework, and I think that when we change qualifying periods, they should be done in a coordinated, strategic manner and looked at across the full range of employment rights, not just a singular small part. I think it is also important to be aware that in addition to all of the issues and concerns that I have just discussed, the results of the committee's own public consultation into the matter showed that a majority of respondents, 54%, broadly agreed with maintaining the 26-week qualifying period. Furthermore, if we add the 9% of respondents who had no view on the removal or not of the qualifying period, then we have 63% who were either in agreement or not opposed. I think public consultation is important, but I think on this case it's demonstrated that that hasn't been an issue that has overwhelming support, or indeed an overwhelming call from consultee respondents. So it's for all of these reasons, and those reasons indeed that I articulated in the previous debate, that I will be opposing the committee amendment. I urge the House to do the same, but I understand that it's unlikely at this stage. Thank you.
And Dr. Keith Archibald, Huncreach, a correlation G-Sprach. I call Dr. Keith Archibald, the Chair of the Committee on the Economy, to Wayne.
Gurmargaret Lascan Corlia, and once again I welcome the contributions of members to this group of amendments, and thank them for those contributions. I think the contributions obviously kind of reflect the previous debate, and I appreciate the remarks that have been made by the Minister. And I would just pick up in particular on the last point in relation to the consultation responses and the call for the 26-week qualification period to be removed was something that was contained within our more detailed written responses, and also in the oral evidence that the committee received. There was quite strong views around that. Obviously, just to pick up on some of the more broad themes and some of the nature of the debate this afternoon. Obviously, any bill that comes into this House can come out in a very different form to what it came in, and obviously it's of course then for departments to respond to the will of the House in terms of the legislation that is brought forward. And just in respect of some of the Minister's comments in the previous debate as well, in relation to the committee have engaged with the Department of Finance or consulting on particular elements of the policy. Obviously, once this bill has passed, if it gets to that stage, it will be for the department to conduct that work. And of course, Lascan Corlia, when committees are scrutinising bills, departments will provide responses to queries, and indeed I've already put on record my thanks to departmental officials for their very constructive engagement with the committee and coming to talk to us on a number of occasions. And indeed I'm sure we'll be seeing more of the officials, because we are dealing with another 3 private members' bills in employment law in the short time ahead. And I think that in terms of this bill and those other private members' bills in relation to employment law, we are making really good progressive moves in terms of supporting workers, and I think that's something to be welcomed. As I have said in some of my previous remarks today, the committee, in considering this bill, really looked into it in great detail. we give it thoughtful consideration. The amendments that we brought forward, we believe, are very considered, that they are pragmatic, and they do provide for some flexibility and modification if necessary following consultation at a later date. So that's something I think that we need to take into account. And in just summing up, I would just ask members to support the amendment number 2 and the other amendments that follow. Go Margaret.
Amendment proposed, this is Amendment 2 as proposed. Amendment proposed to Clause 2, page 4, line 12. Leave out words as printed on the marshalled list. The question is that Amendment 2 be made. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. 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 Okay. Okay, members, if we would clear the lobbies, the question will be put in 3 minutes. I would remind you that we should continue to uphold social distancing and that members who have proxy voting arrangements in place should not come to the chamber. Thank you. Order. If members would resume their seats, please. Before I put the question again, I would remind members present that, if possible, it would be preferable to avoid a division. Anyway, the question is that Amendment 2 be agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. 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 Okay. Okay. Do we have tellers? Okay, members, if members would resume their seats, please. Tellers have been appointed as follows. Tellers for the ayes are Stuart Dixon and Nicola Brogan. Tellers for the noes are Peter Weir and Keith Buchanan. Before the Assembly divides, I want to remind you that, as per Standing Order 112, the Assembly currently has proxy voting arrangements in place. Again, members who have authorised another member to vote on their behalf are not entitled to vote in person and should not enter the lobbies. I also remind members that at times of increased transmission in the community of the requirement for social distancing while the division takes place. I ask you to ensure that you retain at least a 2-metre gap between yourself and other people when moving around in the chamber or the rotunda, and especially in the lobbies. Please be patient at all times, observe the signage and follow the instructions of the lobby clerks. So if we can clear the lobbies, the Assembly will divide, ayes to my right and noes to my left. If members would resume their seats, please. Clerk, could you read the result?
79 members voted, 52 members voted aye, 27 members voted no. The amendment is made.
The amendment is made. Could we unfasten the doors, please? Amendment 3 has already been debated. I call the chairperson to formally move Amendment 3.
I beg to move.
Thank you. Amendment proposed to Clause 2, page 10, line 17, to insert the words as printed on the marshalled list. The question is that Amendment 3 be made. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Okay. Members, I have been advised by party whips, in accordance with Standing Order 1135B, that there is agreement that we can dispense with the 3 minutes and move straight to the division. So I now call for tellers. Please, do we have the tellers? Members, tellers have been appointed as follows. Tellers for the ayes are Kiva Archibald and Nicola Brogan. Tellers for the noes are Peter Weir and Keith Buchanan. Again, I remind all members of the requirement for social distancing while the division takes place, and please ensure that you retain at least a 2-metre gap between yourself and the other person when moving around in the chamber or rotunda. So if we clear the lobbies, the Assembly will divide. Ayes to my right, noes to my left. Members resume their seats, please. Clerk, if you would read the result, please.
79 members voted, 52 members voted aye, 27 members voted no. The amendment is made.
The amendment is made. And please unfasten the doors. Members, we now move Clause 2 as amended stand part. The question is that Clause 2 as amended stand part of the bill. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Clause 3 stand part. No amendments have been tabled to Clause 3. The question is that Clause 3 stand part of the bill. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Amendment 4 has already been debated. I call the Minister for the Economy to formally move Amendment 4. Thank you. Amendment proposed after Clause 3, insert new clause, consultation on leave and pay in cases of miscarriage, as printed on the marshalled list. The question is that Amendment 4 be made and the new clause added to the bill. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. No. All those in favour say aye. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. No. Okay. I have been advised again by the party whips that in accordance with Standing Order 1135B, that there is agreement that we can dispense with the 3 minutes and move straight to the division. So I now call for tellers. Do we have tellers, please? Order. The tellers have been appointed as follows. Tellers for the ayes are Peter Weir and Keith Buchanan. Tellers for the noes are Kiva Archibald and Nicola Brogan. Thank you. Again, to remind members of the requirement for social distancing while the division takes place, please ensure that you retain at least a 2-metre gap. People should know this by now, and between yourself and other people while moving around in the chamber and especially in the lobbies. Could we now clear the lobbies? The Assembly will divide. Ayes to my right and noes to my left. Thank you. Okay, members, resume your seats, please. Just, if we could, Clerk, could you read the result, please?
78 members voted, 27 members voted aye, 49 members voted no. The amendment is negatived.
The amendment is negative. Thank you. Amendment 5 has already been debated and is a paving amendment to Amendment 6. I call the chairperson to formally move Amendment 5.
I beg to move.
Thank you. Amendment proposed to Clause 4, page 10, line 24, insert words as printed on the marshalled list. The question is that Amendment 5 be made. All those in favour say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Okay. Now, Amendment 6 has already been debated, and I call the chairperson to formally move Amendment 6, please.
Moved.
That's amendment proposed to Clause 4, page 10, line 27, to insert words as printed on the marshalled list. The question is that Amendment 6 be made. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. No. I think the ayes have it. I think the ayes have it. Amendment 7. I will not call Amendment 7 as it's consequential to Amendment 4, which has not been made. And then next one. Clause 4 as amended stand part. The question is that Clause 4 as amended stand part of the bill. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Clause 5 stand part. No amendments have been tabled to Clause 5. The question is that Clause 5 stand part of the bill. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Amendment 8 has already been debated. I call the chairperson to formally move Amendment 8.
Beg to move.
Amendment proposed to Schedule 1, page 13, line 6, to insert words as printed on the marshal's list. The question is that Amendment 8 be made. All those in favour say... line 16. Line 16, page 13, line 16. The question is that Amendment 8 be made. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Amendment 9 has already been debated. I call the chairperson to formally move Amendment 9.
Beg to move.
Thank you. Amendment proposed to Schedule 1, page 15, line 2, insert words as printed on the marshalled list. The question is that Amendment 9 be made. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The schedule as amended stand part. The question is that the schedule as amended stand part of the bill. Okay. Stand part of the bill. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Option. Okay. Amendment 10 not called. I will not call Amendment 10 as it is consequential to Amendment 4, which hasn't been made. With the long title. The question is that the long title as amended be agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. Pardon? Oh, sorry. Excuse me. The long title hasn't been amended and it be agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. And that concludes the consideration stage of the Parental Bereavement Leave and Pay Bill. The bill stands now referred to the Speaker. Thank you for your perseverance and patience. Thank you.